You messed up. Who knew that starting a Girl Scout Ponzi scheme would land you in a Supermax? Well, congrats, you're here now. Trying to stay active, you head to the yard, and after failing spectacularly at showing off your non-existent dunking skills, you decide to take a well-earned break. Bad move. You picked the wrong seat. You unknowingly crossed an invisible boundary, the kind that everyone but you knows is very, very important. Fast forward a few minutes and you're getting absolutely wrecked inside a broom closet, and it's not even the people you supposedly offended doing the beating. Nope, it's your own cell block neighbors making sure that you pay the price for disrupting the delicate balance of prison politics. And trust us, it only gets worse from here. We're going to explain not only how bad it can be in a Supermax, but how to survive it in today's episode of the Infographics show, How to Survive a Supermax Prison. The first thing that's going to happen to you upon arriving in any prison is you're going straight into the hole. The SHU, or Special Housing Unit, is a segregated section of the prison reserved for disciplinary or safety concerns. You get your own cell, which, believe it or not, is a luxury. But that's about where the perks end. You're also going to get the worst food imaginable. Expect bland, unidentifiable slop served on a tray that looks older than the prison itself. If you're in segregation, you might even get what inmates call a neutral loaf, a mystery brick of mashed up ingredients that somehow meets nutritional requirements but tastes like regret and punishment. You won't be leaving your cell except for the occasional shower. If you're lucky, you might be able to also talk to the inmate next door through an air vent. If your cell has an opening, you might even be able to toss small messages on a string from one door to another. These messages are called kites, a low-tech prison telephone system that keeps inmates connected despite being in isolation. And survival rule number 1 is you don't mess with the kites. Communication is important, especially in a prison system that is rife with gangs. These gangs are always running businesses both in and out of the prison. Despite the Bureau of Prison's best efforts, no one's been able to stop gangs from coordinating even during full-blown lockdowns. A kite might seem like just a simple message between inmates, something as harmless as trading ramen for stamps in a relatively innocent exchange. Or it could be sorting out a drug deal, arranging commissary trades, or even exchanging favors of a more personal nature. But a kite can also carry some serious weight. They might be relaying orders between shot callers and their underlings, coordinating everything from moving drugs around the prison to organizing hits. That's right, contracted murders can be arranged with just a scrap of paper and a string. And in prison, murder isn't always about money. Sometimes it's just punishment. The point is, messing with a kite is like severing vital lines of communication, and it's a great way to make a lot of people very, very angry. If it's not meant for you, you don't open it, you don't read it, and you definitely don't ask what's inside. You only pass it in the exact direction you're told to, and under no circumstances you let it fall into the hands of the guards. You hide and protect that kite with your life until you can move it to the next link in the chain. And if things get desperate, well, let's just say you better be ready to suitcase it. Wait, what, suitcasing? Oh, well, we'll get to that real soon, and you're not gonna like it one bit. But in prison, you do what you gotta do. When you're fresh in and you move to the SHU, you won't be dealing with kites or prison politics just yet. Right now, you're waiting for the captain's review. This is where prison authorities go through your file and decide just how likely you are to get killed if they throw you into general population. Gang affiliation, race, and past history all play a huge role in deciding where you'll be placed. For instance, the Aryan Brotherhood makes up a very small percentage of the total prison population, but their reputation for extreme violence is so bad that most prisons refuse to house more than 4 AB members in a single block at a time. During your own review process, rule number 2 is to be honest about your criminal history. If you're part of a gang, now is the time to fess up. Lying or omitting information might end up costing you your life. Normally, prisons are supposed to provide a safe environment for all prisoners to serve out their time. In reality, the prisoners are just as much in control of a prison as the warden and his guards. Prison politics are extremely important, to the point that wardens will often cooperate with shot callers just to keep the peace. A shot caller is the most important person in the prison, at least as far as you're concerned. They're the leaders of each prison group, with groups technically broken down by race. And when it comes to race relations in prison, there are a lot of unspoken rules. Be friendly with the wrong person at the wrong time, that could cost you your life. Be unfriendly with the wrong person, same outcome. Probably best to keep your mouth shut for a while. But assuming there's no obvious red flags, you're headed for the general population. Now prison authorities will often try very hard to keep your individual criminal record a secret from the other inmates. That's because of the convict code. Kill 60 people in cold blood? Probably not a problem for most convicts. Kill an old woman, a child, a pregnant woman? You are in serious trouble. Most gangs won't go for that. Doubly so if you're a sex offender that targeted minors, or if you're a snitch. Those are the 2 worst things you can be in prison. Chomos and rats. Either one is a guaranteed death sentence. And that's why prisons try to keep your records confidential, but gangs in prison often have ways of getting to that information. It's called pulling papers, and it is a big deal in prison. Gangs will bribe prison officials or lawyers on the outside to dig up paperwork, especially on potential recruits, because not everyone in prison is who they claim to be. The feds will often strike deals with prisoners. You might have pulled 2 20-year sentences to be served back to back, but the feds will cut it down to just 1 sentence if you agree to cooperate. All you gotta do is turn informant, go into the prison, join a gang, and be the eyes and ears for the feds. Even wardens will bribe prisoners with extra privileges or comforts if they turn informant, keeping prison authorities up to date on inner prison politics. If your papers get pulled and you have a history of being an informant, you're done. But prison is full of informants, despite all the codes of honor that you hear about. At the end of the day, nobody wants to do 40 years straight. Turning over some info for extra commissary or a better cell can be a good deal when you're facing spending a quarter of your life or more behind bars. Which is why, as you join the general population, now is as good a time as any to let you in on the biggest rule in prison. No snitching, ever. You see something, you keep your mouth shut. Now, not snitching doesn't mean telling your shot caller if you see others scheming or plotting. What no snitching really means is that if you're part of a plot and your partners get caught, you don't offer up any information. If you see someone else breaking the rules and they get caught, you didn't see a thing. But if you're personally wronged, you have every right to tell someone about it, just don't tell the guards. A sidebar to no snitching: if you've got problems with another inmate, you either handle it yourself or you bring it up with your shot caller. If you go to the guards, other inmates will assume you're a snitch, or worse, that your entire gang is full of rats. Maybe your shot caller's cutting deals with a warden. Now your whole group looks weak. A rookie who makes this mistake might get beaten badly by his own people, a way to prove to the other gangs that the problem has been handled. But if you're a veteran and you snitch to the guards, you just signed your own death warrant. Alright, so you got a cell assigned, it's time to introduce yourself to your new cellie. If you're lucky, you're in a well-maintained facility that's not overcrowded, but don't count on it. Expect to be crammed into a 2-person cell with as many as 5 people at a time, and let's hope you checked the tough guy act at the prison gates. Nobody's buying it and nobody's got time for your attitude. Maybe you watch too many movies. Maybe you think the only way to earn some respect in prison is to march in and knock out the biggest guy. Yeah, good luck with that. The only thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna get shanked. There's rules and structure to prison life, and anyone who steps out of line gets put back in line. But more to the point, nobody's got time for wannabe gangsters or backyard tough guys. You've got people in here doing life sentences. They are never going to see the outside of a prison again. You ain't tougher than guys with nothing to lose. Nobody wants to deal with attitude. Prison is bad enough. Everyone just wants to do their time or pass their days as quietly as possible. So respect is important. You come at the other inmates correctly. You say things like "excuse me" if you bump into people. You mind your own business and you go on with your life. Inside the cell, there's a hierarchy, and it goes OGs before new fish. Now, maybe you got put in a cell with someone who doesn't know their place, always making trouble, but those prisoners don't tend to last long. So when you walk into a cell, unless you and your cellie arrive at the same time, consider the convicts already in there to be OG. That means that you show them respect, you respect their stuff, and you don't mess with their routines. And let's get one thing straight, OG gets the bottom bunk. You take the top bunk and you be mindful of what you're doing up there, because anything that falls down might just start a problem that you don't want. Cells are typically about 7 feet by 12 feet, that's 7 feet across and 12 feet wide. You get a sink and a toilet combo, maybe a small desk to sit and write at, and that's it. Don't be a pig, clean up after yourself, and that means wipe the toilet seat after you pee and rinse out the sink after you brush your teeth. The sink often doubles as a soup bowl, with big communal meals cooked in them, so keep it clean and hygienic. If your cell has an outlet, you probably will find inmates using stringers, pieces of metal hooked up to wires with wood in between them that get really hot when plugged in. You can stick a stringer into the bowl and boil water to make things like pasta and soup. Remember, what you got in your cell has to serve multiple purposes. When you're going number 2, you warn your cellies and you ask them to turn around. Also, you flush immediately. The moment that deuce makes a splash, you're flushing. You don't want to stink up the cell for your cellmates. Also, check that the water in the sink is running before you go number 2 in the bowl. That's because often the guards will shut off the water in the toilets right before they do a surprise inspection. It keeps people from flushing contraband. The last thing you want is to drop a deuce and have it sitting there for hours because the guards turned off the suction to the toilets. Yes, that is a real thing, so plan accordingly. General cleanliness in your cell is key, so don't be a pig or you're gonna get corrected. In prison, there's only one warning. After that, you get a correction, and that usually means having your head introduced to a concrete wall a few times until you get the message. When you first arrive, you can request some cleaning supplies, and you'll quickly notice that a lot of the inmates take cleanliness very seriously. For many, it's a coping mechanism, a small way to maintain control in a place where control is almost non-existent. But also, bugs and rats are a big problem, especially in the South. The last thing you want is to have bugs and rats crawling around your cell, because the warden isn't calling an exterminator. And even if your cellie doesn't care, the people in the cells next to you will. If your mess is the reason they're getting rats and roaches at night, they will be quick to correct you. Before you start your day, there's one more general rule about your cell that you need to know. Privacy in prison is almost non-existent. If you're on lockdown, forget about it. You are stuck in there with zero alone time. But if you're not on lockdown, you at least have the chance to leave your cell and have your door open. So you gotta handle your personal business smartly, especially in tiny cramped cells. But if you're not on lockdown and you have the privilege of open cells, the way to create privacy is simple. Hang up a towel on the door and then close it. You won't be able to fully shut it or lock your own cell door, but you can close it just enough so the blanket over the window gives you some privacy inside. That's your window of opportunity to handle your business, and everyone else will know to leave you alone. And don't go knocking on doors or barging in if you see a towel hanging. There could be all sorts of things happening in there, and none of them are your business. If you need to talk to someone, wait until they take the towel down. In the morning, you're going to go to the showers and get chow, and the showers are the most dangerous part of the prison if you don't know what you're doing. First up, make sure you shower. You don't want to stink. It'll annoy your cellmates and the other inmates. But you don't just take off for the shower either. You and your cellmate are a team, so when you hit the showers, you go together. One of you stands outside the shower and acts as a lookout while the other one washes. If you're on lookout and you see some dudes rushing up, you bang the wall hard as you can. That's the universal signal to let the guy in the shower know someone's coming for them. Make sure you wear shower shoes too. The shower's a good place to get fungus growing on your feet. But dudes do all sorts of things in the shower that ends up on the floor, so keep your feet clean and don't bring anything back to the cell with you. In a lot of joints, the showers are sanctioned places to fight. They're relatively private due to the prison not being allowed to stick cameras in there, so if you got a beef with someone, the shower's probably the place to squash it. And you need to be aware of others looking to squash beef so you don't get in the way. As you're going to chow, you're going to have your first opportunity to start exploring the cell block some. Don't be peeking into people's cells as you walk past. There's a lot of dudes in prison with mental issues, but also if people see you peeking, they might think that you're being nosy. Maybe you're doing recon for a hit or making plans to steal from them. Don't give anyone a reason to be suspicious of you and keep your eyes straight ahead. Now you're at morning chow, and if you sit in the wrong place, you're dead. It doesn't matter who your cellie is. When you get to chow, you sit with your own race. Prisons typically divided into whites, blacks, Mexicans, and the others. In some prisons, the others band together and they form a strong faction. But in most places, they'll align with either the blacks or the Mexicans, usually siding with whoever is weaker to balance the power structure. Because in prison, everything is all about numbers. After you get your tray of food, you sit with a group and you stay there. You might go play dominoes during rec time with someone of another race, but there are times and places where mixing is allowed, and chow isn't one of them. Race relations are everything in prison, and they exist to keep the peace. That being said, each region of the US has its own rules. What flies in a California prison might get you seriously hurt in a Texas yard. The unwritten rules aren't the same everywhere, but breaking them is always a bad idea. You'll probably get introduced to your shot caller at your first chow. That's the guy who's in charge of your group, and they'll introduce you to their lieutenants. This is an unbreakable chain of command. You don't jump the chain except in an emergency, otherwise you're gonna get put in your place. Violence is common in prison, and surprisingly, it has rules. First up, you don't refuse a fight ever. You can't afford to make your group look weak. And if you don't stand up for yourself, your group won't stand up for you either. And once you're in a fight, there is no copping out, no stopping halfway. If you're losing, you keep swinging until you're flat on your back unconscious. Because in prison, quitting means no respect. And if you have no respect, you become a mark, a walking target. So you fight until it's lights out. What you don't want to be is a door warrior. Those are the dudes who kick and bang on the locked doors to make a bunch of noise, but then they can't back it up when it's time to fight. After your chow, you're going to have a count, and then you're going to go off on work assignments. You keep your head down during your work assignments and you don't cause trouble. That'll make the warden or the guards take measures against the convicts. Prisons often use collective punishment as a means of deterring bad behavior. The last thing you want to be is the guy responsible for a lockdown because you did something stupid. If you put the facility on lockdown because you were handling some business, that's different. But if you made everyone lose their yard time because you were being stupid, that's going to get corrected right away, so don't be stupid. During work assignments, you'll have more access to different parts of the prison. This is an important time for the transfer of everything from information to contraband between different parts of the prison. One thing you better get used to is the idea of suitcasing. You're subject to a search anytime you're moving around the prison, which means there's only one truly safe place to hide anything, from shanks to drugs to kites. Yeah, you guessed it, your rectum. On average, you probably got about 7 inches of storage space, and one of the first lessons you'll learn in prison is how to suitcase anything you really don't want the guards to find. While on work assignments, your shot caller might ask you to carry a kite from one part of the prison to another. Your prison security might be lax enough that you're lucky and you can just stick it in your pocket. Otherwise, it's gonna be the pocket God gave you, and you wrap your cargo up in plastic, then use a lotion or butter and you slide it right in. If you're transferring between prisons and moving messages or contraband around, you want to make sure it's deep enough to avoid the cavity search that you're going to have to endure. And after lunch, there's typically more work time followed by yard time or rec time. Here, the prison population gets a few hours to hit the yard, usually in large groups, and this is the best place to accidentally break a rule that gets you killed. First off, race is everything. You may play checkers with some random dude in the evening when you're inside, but in the yard you stick to your group. The entire yard is segregated by race, and every race has its own piece of territory. No matter what, you don't stray into that territory for any reason. If you're playing ball and you accidentally knock it into another race's territory, you wait for them to kick it back to you. And if they're moving around the yard, you make sure you don't accidentally stray so much as an inch into another group's territory out of the common walkway. You might get corrected by that race, but most of the time, your own race is going to jump you. This ensures harmony between the races and relative stability. Most prisons have removed the weights after realizing letting violent, hot-headed inmates get ultra-jacked was a terrible idea. But that doesn't mean you won't get physically fit. You've got jumping jacks, burpees, push-ups, sit-ups, and a whole list of bodyweight exercises to keep you strong. And it's not optional. Your group expects you to be able to fight. And if you're out of shape, you're a liability. Only the real OGs or big bosses get a pass from this. Also, when you're out in the yard, don't lie down in the dirt. If you want to lay down and take a nap, you stick to the concrete. That's because the dirt is where contraband of all kind gets buried. Shanks, drugs, money, cell phones. You don't want to be in someone's way when they're going to go retrieve their contraband. And you definitely don't want to be the idiot lying on top of contraband when the guards decide to do a surprise inspection. You need to learn the flow of traffic in the yard. Don't ever move against the flow of traffic. This alerts the guards and the other inmates that you're probably about to get someone. When it comes to yard time, you need to be aware that the last 10 minutes of every rec period is for cleanup. No, that's not putting exercise equipment away or straightening up. We're talking about a different type of cleanup. This is when beef gets squashed or more serious punishment is dished out. Because there's so many people, the guards can have a hard time figuring out who did what. So cleanup is a good time to shank someone a shot caller said has to go. Often, shanks get buried in the dirt, which is just one more reason you don't want to be the fool who falls asleep there, especially if it's next to where someone just stashed a murder weapon, because the guards don't care. They're happy to pin the murder on whoever's closest, whether you did it or not. While you're in the yard, it's also a good time to get fixed up with your contraband of choice. But don't go looking for it, though. Don't go asking who's selling dope or who's got this or that. They'll find you. If you're asking who's got the dope, it looks pretty suspicious, and people might think you're an informant. Drugs flow freely in prison, so chill and wait, they'll come to you. At night, you're going to have dinner, a facility-wide count, and then 3 hours of free time before heading back to your cell. This is typically when most people will use the phone, and you better know good phone etiquette because some people will straight up kill you for messing up their phone time. You're going to get about 500 minutes of phone time per month, but only in 15-minute chunks. Once you hit the 15-minute mark, the phone cuts off automatically. It doesn't matter if you're mid-sentence or in the middle of a life-changing conversation. So when you're near the phone bank, don't ruin it for people. No yelling, no acting stupid, and most importantly, give people their space. They might be talking to a lawyer or a loved one or the only person keeping them sane. And while 500 minutes sounds like a lot, it's really just about 8 hours for the entire month. And in prison, every second counts. Make sure you signed up to use the phone and you don't mess with other people's time. The quickest way to catch a beating in prison is to take more time than you're allotted, or take another person's time slot. Alrighty, so we've covered your prison day, rinse and repeat for the next 20 years, but there are some important rules we still need to cover. You need to know that a lot of hits will also happen in the morning when the doors crack open. Typically, when a hit gets put on you, they'll tell your cellmate so they can get out. So if it's the morning and your cellmate dips out real quick, be ready because there's about to be several dudes coming through that door to get you. You can put some liquid soap on the floor and try to slow him down and place your back against the wall, but be ready to fight. Respect is everything though, and if you don't want to be in a gang, make it clear and stick to your guns even if it means you catch a whooping. Inmates will respect the fact that you stood up for yourself, but likewise, you need to show everyone else courtesy and respect. Remember, you've got dudes in there with serious mental illnesses and life prison sentences. They might have nothing to lose. Always remember that you're surrounded by predators, so you can't show weakness or fear. The moment someone gets a whiff of weakness, you're going to be a target. They'll be coming after you for everything they can take. For Nicolas Cochon, murdering his cellmate wasn't the end of his crime, it was only the beginning. After repeatedly stabbing Thierry Baudry with a pair of scissors and suffocating him with a garbage bag, Nicolas wasn't done. What followed was something out of a horror story. Using a smuggled razor blade, he sliced off pieces of Baudry's flesh, still warm, before cooking them on a camping stove with sautéed onions. And then he ate them as though he was in a fine dining restaurant. Oh, and one more detail, he was French. And if you can believe it, this is somehow one of the less insane people we're going to cover in today's video. Grab your shiv and watch your back, because on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're going inside to look at the world's most dangerous prison inmates. Number 15. Nicolas Cochon. This despicable act of prison violence took place in 2007, earning Nicolas Cochon the nickname the Cannibal of Rouen. What started this argument that led to a brutal act of cannibalism? A disagreement about the state of the prison toilets. That's why you don't leave the seat up, folks. According to Mr. Cochon, he made multiple requests for psychiatric help from the prison staff, fearing that he might be violent. No one was listening to me, he said. I made several appeals for help, saying I was a man capable of being dangerous. I took action and then they took me seriously. We don't think anyone can deny that he proved his point. Let's look at another horrific act of prison murder and mutilation. Number 14. Michael Hernandez. Michael Hernandez was a man who didn't take things lightly, and when it comes to dealing with his cellmate, his response was anything but ordinary. His victim was 58-year-old Larry Mark, who was doing time in a prison 47 miles north of Gainesville, Florida, on a first-degree murder charge. Larry had made plenty of mistakes in his life, but none as fatal as the last one, allegedly pestering Hernandez. Crucially, Hernandez was already serving a life sentence for his crimes, with little possibility of parole. That meant he had nothing to lose and a lot to gain in do not mess with me prison cred. He had murdered an elderly woman during a home invasion, and during his sentencing for that crime, he had further charges lumped on for threatening to murder the president. Clearly not the kind of guy you want annoyed at you, but Larry was jaded, having been in jail since 1982. In 2018, when Larry Mark pushed Hernandez a little too far, Hernandez pulled out a prison shank and stabbed his roomie to death. But it didn't end there. Hernandez had a flair for the theatrical, so he also rolled up Mark's body in a sheet, cut off one of his ears, and then made it into a pendant. When Hernandez walked into the mess hall for breakfast proudly wearing Mark's dangling severed ear around his neck, the guards suddenly became aware of what had happened. Hernandez was given another life sentence for his crime, which is great because clearly the first life sentence did wonders in curbing his more violent tendencies. Speaking of terrifying killer inmates who seem to have a lifelong grudge against eyes, let's head on over to the British Isles for the life and crimes of Gary Vinter, another man who was just seemingly addicted to violence. Number 13. Gary Vinter. Vinter was first sent to prison in 1996 after murdering his colleague, Carl Eden. He'd stabbed Carl 37 times, puncturing every single one of his organs. He was imprisoned only to be released almost 10 years later in 2005. To the surprise of no one, he almost immediately went back to prison for his part in a pub brawl. Sadly, Gary was just getting started. He was released again in 2008, being considered a model prisoner. He would not be considered that for long. He stabbed his ex-wife to death in his own mother's home, sending him straight back to the big house. In 2011, he had a brutal altercation with child killer Roy Whiting. Gary used the sharpened handle of a toilet brush to mutilate Roy, earning him an indefinite sentence. And he still wasn't done. In 2014, Gary attacked another lifer, another man with 2 murders to his name, Lee Newell. The attack destroyed one of Lee's eyes and left him with a traumatic brain injury. And what motivated this attack? Well, Gary wasn't happy with the prison's gym facilities. He thought that if he murdered another inmate, he might get transferred to a facility with a better gym. Sometimes the reason for a murder can be every bit as horrible as the murder itself. Number 12. Jackson Vogel. This was definitely the case for 24-year-old Jackson Vogel. Vogel's prejudices drove him to brutally murder his 19-year-old cellmate, Micah Loreno, in Wisconsin's Green Bay Correctional Institution. Micah was serving a year in jail for being party to a substantial battery, but according to everyone who knew him, a good kid with potential who had just fallen in with the wrong crowd. Vogel? Not so much. He was serving a 40-year sentence for the attempted murder of his own mother. He stabbed her repeatedly, strangled her, and even tried to snap her neck. You can already see the problem with placing these two inmates together. On August 27, 2024, a guard making his regular patrols found that Vogel had placed a piece of paper over the window into their cell. When the guard told Vogel to remove the piece of paper, he suddenly saw Micah's corpse hanging from the top of their bunks, his ankles and wrists tied with orange material. He had been tortured and strangled to death, an act which Vogel described as, quote, ecstasy. When Vogel was removed from the cell during the murder investigation, authorities uncovered more than they expected. Alongside strips of orange fabric used to bind Micah, they found a chilling piece of paper scrawled with the words, "Kill all humans." The note was littered with expletives, targeting black and gay people, painting a disturbing picture of Vogel's state of mind. And yet, somehow, Jackson Vogel seemed like a model citizen compared to our next contestant. Number 11. Jamie Osuna. Jamie Osuna is a self-proclaimed Satanist killer who the media nicknamed the Man of 1,000 Faces for his extensive series of face tats. He was first arrested for the horrific torture and murder of single mother Yvette Pena, which he took a great deal of pride in. Going to prison didn't help mellow Jamie out. In fact, it only made him more violent and creative. His cellmate in Corcoran State Prison, 44-year-old Luis Romero, met a horrific end in 2019, when Osuna decided to turn him into a grisly arts and crafts project while the guards were looking the other way. Using smuggled weapons, Osuna murdered Romero and engaged in some of the most disgusting mutilations imaginable. Romero was decapitated, had various body parts removed, and a smile carved into his face. If that wasn't disturbing enough, Osuna scrawled "ha ha ha" on the cell wall using Romero's blood and crafted a necklace from the severed remains. But what's scarier, a fellow inmate that might murder you because they're edgy and evil like Jamie Osuna, or one that might kill you for no good reason at all because they're completely out of touch with reality? Number 10. Michael Harkin. Dan Childs would probably say the latter if he hadn't been murdered in HMP Bristol by his mentally unstable cellmate, Michael Harkin, in summer of 2024. Not only was Childs' murder sadistic, it was also for the most bizarre reason ever. It was because his surname had the word child in it. Harkin got it into his head that his cellmate was a pedophile, something that was completely untrue, but that didn't stop Harkin from planning to punish him accordingly. Childs was tormented over a long period by Harkin, who told him that if he slept, he would suffocate him. This turned out to be more than an idle threat. On June 4th, while Childs slept, Harkin wrapped a TV cord around his neck and strangled him before gently tucking him into bed. But Harkin wasn't done. With one cellmate murdered, he decided to find his former cellmate and then go for a kill streak. Harkin crept up behind his former cellmate in the showers and launched a frenzied attack, slashing wildly with an improvised weapon and intent on murder. The only reason his assassination attempt failed was the quick action of another prisoner who heard the victim's screams and intervened. Armed with a long-handled mop, the prisoner managed to fend Harkin off until the guards arrived. After being convicted of manslaughter, Harkin was transferred out of the jail and into a new permanent position at the high-security Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. Broadmoor, incidentally, is also briefly the stomping ground of our next deadly inmate, who in his prime probably would have eaten anyone else on the list so far for breakfast. Number 9. Robert Maudsley. Robert Maudsley is a self-proclaimed vigilante and hunter of creeps. After murdering a man who propositioned him for sex in 1974, Maudsley was sent to Broadmoor after he was deemed psychologically ill. But this wasn't the end of him. In fact, he was just getting started on his incarcerated killing spree. In 1977, he and a fellow inmate locked themselves in a room with 26-year-old David Francis, a convicted abuser of children. They tortured David to death over the course of 9 solid hours, causing him unimaginable pain before killing him. This got a manslaughter charge appended to Maudsley's ever-growing rap sheet. He was transferred from Broadmoor to Wakefield Prison, which Maudsley took issue with and requested a transfer back. Perhaps they should have listened to him. He'd commit another 2 brutal murders on the same day at Wakefield, making him officially the most prolific killer on this list so far. It was July 29, 1978, when Maudsley decided he wanted to try to kill 7 prisoners in a single day. First was the wife killer, Salney Darwood, who Maudsley garroted and then stabbed to death before hiding his corpse under his bed. After that, Maudsley tried to lure other prisoners into his cell so he could commit a second murder there, but given that Maudsley was not only a known killer, but also very creepy, it didn't work. Instead, with an improvised dagger in hand, he went on the prowl looking for a new victim to kill. He found 56-year-old sex offender William Roberts lying in bed and decided to violently stab him to death and slam his head up against the wall. Once he was done, Maudsley casually walked into the office of the prison wing, drenched in blood, and placed his dagger down on the desk, then said that there would be 2 fewer people at roll call that day. Since then, he's been kept in solitary confinement in a cell designed especially for him. But having your own specially designed cell is one thing. What happens when you're such a dangerous inmate that your exploits inspire the creation of its own Supermax prison? Number 8. Tommy Silverstein. Tommy Silverstein, also known as Terrible Tom, was the former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood white supremacist prison gang. Tommy found himself institutionalized in brutal reform schools from a young age. His cruel and domineering mother taught him that the only way to avoid being a victim is to hit back harder and with far more brutality. Tommy took this message to heart and became a violent thug for the rest of his life. That was until a string of armed robberies landed him with a 15-year sentence in Leavenworth, Kansas, and that's where he developed his ties with the Aryan Brotherhood, one of the most ruthless prison gangs in the U.S. The first of his several prison murders was Danny Atwell, who refused to act as a heroin mule, so Silverstein killed him. Tommy then got transferred to the United States Penitentiary Marion in Illinois, where he was kept in the control unit for dangerous prisoners. In this prison, he'd later strike up a friendship with fellow neo-Nazi creep Clayton Fontaine and face off against a black prison gang called the DC Blacks. As a part of this ongoing prison race war, Tommy and Clayton murdered rival gang member Robert Chappelle, and later the DC Blacks' national leader Raymond Lee Cadillac Smith. Smith had it out for Tommy, but Tommy was still his mother's son. He and Clayton murdered Smith by stabbing him a horrific 67 times before hanging his body from an elevated prison walkway to show off to the other inmates. Tommy was certainly sending a strong message. He was one of the scariest men in the U.S. prison system. In 1983, Officer Merle Klutz found himself on the receiving end of Tommy's wrath after allegedly destroying some of his paintings. Tommy made an elaborate plan which involved the collaboration of other prisoners involving a shiv and a homemade handcuff key. After breaking from his restraints, Tommy brutally murdered Officer Klutz, and not long after, Tommy's buddy Clayton used this exact same technique to murder another prison officer, Robert Hoffman. In response, he was sentenced to decades in solitary confinement, later becoming the longest-held prisoner in solitary confinement in American history. His murder of Officer Klutz would also serve as the inspiration for the creation of USP Florence AdMax, a hardcore Supermax prison in Colorado, created specifically to prevent incidents like this from ever happening again. And that's the legacy of Tommy Silverstein. How about we introduce a little gender equality into the mix? After all, it's not just the men who can be terrifying, dangerous inmates. Number 7. Rebecca Butterfield. Despite Rebecca Butterfield's whimsical name, she is a dangerous and unstable sadist eager to enact violence on whoever she can, even her best friend. While detained at the high-security Silverwater Women's Correctional Center in Australia, she racked up an astonishing 110 disciplinary violations. Among them were 40 assaults on others and just as many self-inflicted incidents, including a horrifying episode where she bashed her head against a wall 105 times, splitting her skull open. She was also known to regularly attack guards and doctors in sudden fits of rage. Her methods included stabbing, biting, and throwing objects at them, including colostomy bags, boiling water, and even her own urine. But in her most brutal incident of all, she turned against her only friend, Blue Slim Ward, for seemingly no reason, stabbing her to death. Rebecca also promised that if she was ever released from prison, she would definitely kill again. Not that being in prison was really stopping her. So far, we've mainly dealt with gangsters and psychopaths killing people in jail to get revenge, gratification, or respect. But what about the escape artists? The inmates who will stop at nothing to taste freedom again, even if it means slaughtering anyone in their way. This was the case for another classic tattooed scoundrel, Ricky DuBose. Number 6. Ricky DuBose. Ricky's most famous act of violence didn't actually take place in the prison itself, but on a bus transporting him and around 30 other prisoners. He and an accomplice, Donnie Rowe, slipped out of their handcuffs and barged their way into the bus's cab. They shot the guard and the driver, Sergeant Christopher Monica and Sergeant Curtis Bilyeu, with their own stolen guns. They managed to escape after this, before being recaptured, at which point Ricky was convicted and given the death penalty, though he was found dead in his cell 10 days later. Our next inmate might not be somebody you've heard of, but you definitely know one of his victims. Number 5. Christopher Scarver. When Christopher Scarver first entered prison, he was known as a man who killed during a botched robbery in June 1990. Suffering from messianic delusions, he sometimes referred to himself as Christ. But Scarver's place in the annals of crime history wasn't secured by that crime alone. It was his fateful encounter with one of the world's most notorious killers, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. Many of his fellow inmates have said that Dahmer was an unpleasant man to be around in jail. Not surprising, given he was a sadistic serial-killing necrophiliac. He regularly creeped out the other prisoners by making references to his crimes, and given that the majority of Dahmer's victims had been people of color, this hit a little too close to home for Christopher Scarver, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. While Dahmer and convicted wife killer Jesse Anderson were cleaning the prison gym, Scarver grabbed the metal rod from a barbell and bludgeoned Dahmer in the head with it. Scarver then beat Jesse Anderson to near death with a wooden stick. After doing this, he went to the prison authorities and said, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are dead." We think that Christopher Scarver probably would have gotten on well with Robert Maudsley if they ever met. Now let's go back to another female convict who just can't seem to keep out of trouble, this time from the Great White North, Canada. Number 4. Renee Jeanette Akobe. The deadly inmate in question is Renee Jeanette Akobe. She's the first woman in Canada to be given the label of dangerous offender, entailing both a permanent stay in prison and special security considerations. So what did Akobe do to earn such a menacing title? Back in 2001, Akobe was being held in an Aboriginal healing lodge when she and a fellow inmate attacked a guard. Akobe's co-conspirator coshed the guard over the head with a sock filled with pieces of metal, and Akobe then held a knife to her throat, threatening to murder her. Thankfully, the guard survived, but Akobe was just getting started with her one-woman war against the Canadian correctional system. In 2002, she took it up a notch and slashed a guard's face with what was very likely a razor blade. The guard survived but was left with some pretty nasty wounds. That same year, Akobe and another friend tied up an inmate and tortured her with broken glass to the legs. This resulted in a hostage situation that lasted 4 hours before the captured inmate narrowly escaped with her life. Things didn't calm down for Akobe in 2003. Teaming up with another accomplice, she launched a brutal attack on an inmate with learning disabilities. Armed with a wooden handle and a metal bar, Akobe beat the woman mercilessly, leaving her with severe injuries across her body. Remarkably, the victim survived, but just barely. In 2004, she held another inmate hostage using a homemade shiv made out of a toothbrush and a razor blade, which she held up to the fellow inmate's throat. And in 2005, another accomplice helped Akobe take a pair of guards hostage, torturing them over a number of hours. They were forced to take medications, had their bodies cut, and had cigarettes put out on their skin. One of the guards got a particularly rough ride, getting chunks of her hair pulled out, having air freshener sprayed into her eyes, and getting repeatedly punched in the face. In 2007, when Akobe was being escorted to the prison showers by 3 armed guards, she turned the tables and created yet another hostage situation. She pulled out a sharp screw she'd taken from a CD player and held it to one of the guards' throats, threatening to pierce a vital artery if her demands weren't met. She then wrapped a belt around the guard's neck and demanded, among other things, a transfer to a different institution, cigarettes, and a soda. Now for a bit of a monster-on-monster crime from New England. Number 3. Mark Hobson. You may not be familiar with the spree killer Mark Hobson, but the more you find out about him, the more you're likely to hate him. Back in 2002, he got into a spat with a love rival and stabbed him 5 times in the chest, puncturing his lung. Hobson's victims survived this incident, but his next ones wouldn't be so lucky. During a vicious 2004 killing spree, he murdered 4 people in North Yorkshire. The first was his girlfriend, Claire Sanderson, who he beat almost to death with a hammer and then strangled her. The second, Claire's sister, Diane. He tied her up and brutally tortured her before murdering her in a similar fashion. Not long after this, he killed an elderly couple, James and Joan Britton, together. Because of the horrific nature of his crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison with the rare recommendation from a judge that he would never be released. While in jail, he had an altercation with a fellow prisoner named Ian Huntley, who had been convicted of drowning 2 young girls in a bathtub. Hobson attacked Huntley and poured boiling water all over him, which led to Hobson being put into solitary confinement. Our next inmate was, for a time, considered to be in the top 10 most dangerous prisoners in the world. He earned that terrifying title, and you're about to find out why. Number 2. James Porky O'Rourke. James Porky O'Rourke has been in prison for over 30 years now, since murdering a man named Neil Kearney back in 1992. Witnesses saw him dropping a large slab of concrete on Neil's head, and in prison, Porky only got more violent. In 1997, he was handed an additional 6 years in prison after taking a prison officer and a nurse hostage for 19 straight hours, threatening their lives throughout. In 2002, he assaulted and abducted another victim in jail, giving him another 8 years in jail. And then in 2004, he gave another attack that scored him 4 more years in the clink. In 2005, Porky made a name for himself at HMP Kilmarnock, where he stabbed a prison escort and a senior jail official with a smuggled blade. That got another 8 years added to his sentence, and in 2019 he got another 9 years for slitting another prisoner's throat in the jail gym. And Porky's prison crime spree was still not over. In 2022, he was given another life sentence after murdering fellow inmate Dean Ramsey. Ramsey was tied up and beaten severely before Porky made a garrote out of bed sheets, wrapped it around the man's throat, and methodically strangled him to death. A source inside the prison said, "It doesn't take much for Porky to flip." That much is actually pretty obvious by now. But no list of the world's most dangerous prison inmates would be complete without one very special and exceedingly violent man. His exploits were so famous that he was even portrayed by Tom Hardy in a 2008 movie based on his life and crimes. Number 1. Charles Bronson. We are talking, of course, about Michael Gordon Peterson, better known by his professional name Charles Bronson. From humble beginnings with a family involved in local politics in his hometown of Luton, Charles's life took a very different path. At just 13, he joined a violent gang, marking the start of his criminal career and leading to his first stint in juvenile detention. As the years went on, he became a more and more violent man, getting into fights with his friends, strangers, and managers at the various jobs he had trouble holding down. In 1974, at the age of 22, Bronson officially started his career as a professional prisoner when he was sent to Walton Jail for robbery. Within a few days, he attacked a pair of other prisoners and got sent to the high-security area known as the punishment block. This would not prove to be an effective deterrent. In 1975, he was transferred to HMP Hale, where he started having altercations with the guards and smashed up the prison workshop. He was taken to the punishment block there and injected with a mood stabilizer that made him sick until he was deemed safe to re-enter the general population. But that didn't work, and he immediately started attacking his fellow inmates again. In the years that followed, he was transferred from prison to prison, leaving a trail of carnage in his wake. He beat up prisoners and guards, destroyed property, and made frequent escape attempts, in one case trying to dig his way out of prison. But he still wasn't done. In 1985, when he was stationed in the infamous Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, he escaped and performed a rooftop protest, causing $250,000 of property damage in the process. He also took hostages almost constantly at various prisons, with his victims being everyone from his art teacher to a pair of Iraqi hijackers in 1996. It reached a point where his jailers realized that he simply was not safe around any other people. That's why in 1999 he had a special unit built just for him to keep him away from the general prison population for good. These days he's mellowed out and mainly focuses on his painting, a passion so dear to him that since 2014 he's mainly gone by Charles Salvador as a tribute to the surrealist painter Salvador Dali. His last appeal for parole was rejected in 2023, so it is unlikely that the infamous Charles Bronson will stop being England's most dangerous prisoner anytime soon. You are one of the most feared men in the criminal underworld. Your name is whispered in dark alleys and strikes terror into those who hear it. You've done some awful things, and now it's caught up with you. And now you're here. Complexo Penitenciario Anísio Jobim, the most infamous prison in Brazil. This overcrowded, rundown prison is filled with gang members looking for revenge against the guards and their fellow prisoners. This isn't just a prison, it's a war zone. Welcome to your first day at Anísio Jobim. In this episode of the Infographics Show, why you wouldn't survive one day in the world's most violent prison. You knew you were taking a risk coming down to Brazil to pursue a bounty, but the wealthy grandmother of that drug dealer offered a pretty big check. It was hard to refuse. You got your man, and the gang member who killed him is down for the count for good. Now you have to get back to the US to collect that money. To do that, you have to break out of a prison containing well over 1,000 inmates crowded into a rundown facility. As you're marched into the gates, the whole place looks like a tinderbox waiting to explode. It's a tough place, but you're a tough guy. Known as Compilation, this prison is known as the worst of the worst, and it's located hours away from civilization. The closest city, Manaus, is known for its high crime levels and is the jumping-off point to the massive Amazon rainforest. The northern city is a hub of the local drug trade, and so Compilation is designed to hold high-level prisoners. Brazil has 3 tiers of prisons in its overcrowded system, and while the open and semi-open regimes offer some freedom, you're headed to one of the more secure, closed-regime prisons. The kind designed to hold drug dealers, gang members, and killers. You've done your research, but that is just the beginning. As an American prisoner in Brazil, you might hope for some diplomatic intervention, but American diplomats don't usually work to release career criminals who just pulled off a hit abroad. That's fine, you've been in worse places, you think. As you're pulled from the van and through the prison gates, the first thing that comes to mind is just how noisy the place is. That's because this place is crowded, really crowded. One of the biggest hallmarks of the Brazilian prison system is that it is massively overcrowded. In 2017, Compilation had around 2,200 inmates, despite being built for around 600. That means privacy is going to be in short supply around here, and you're probably going to have to fight for anything you want. But first, it's time for what little is left of your dignity to be stripped away, literally, as you are thoroughly searched by the guards. They're satisfied you don't have anything hidden, mostly because you didn't have time to prep. And then you're given your clothes back and taken to the main area. And if you thought it was chaos before, just wait. You're walked through the cell block and you stick out like a sore thumb. You're pretty sure that you hear several slurs against Americans shouted from the cells, but you're not worried. You've heard a lot worse. All that matters is showing that you're the top dog in this prison. And that all starts when you meet your cellmate. You've been behind bars plenty of times, and it usually comes down to a show of dominance right out of the gate. There's just one problem. You won't have one cellmate here. As soon as you're brought to the rundown concrete cell with metal bars, you get your first nasty culture shock. This cell is packed. The cell seems designed for 2 people, but there are 5 already in here and only 2 beds. One guy has what looks like a makeshift hammock in the corner, but you kind of assume the others will just be sleeping on the floor. Of course, who gets those 2 beds will be up in the air, which means showing these young men what you're made of. It's time to size up the competition. You're the oldest guy here, that's for sure. The others are all Brazilian and they look young and wiry. You notice what looks like gang tattoos on several of their arms, and you assume they're all members of drug gangs. That's part of why this prison is so overcrowded. The vast majority of convicts here are drug dealers and gang members, many of whom are caught up in sweeps targeting these criminal industries. In Brazil, a ton of street crime, including murder, gets swept under the rug if it's not made a government priority. Sure enough, the 5 young men look you over, and then the largest of them gets up from his cot. He squares up to you, sneers, spits on the ground, and steps up as if he's about to pull a weapon. You don't waste any time stepping forward and slamming your forehead into his, just enough to hurt, not enough to knock him out. It's your signature welcoming move, and guys usually either gear up for a fight or back down. This guy actually seems to think it's funny, as he chuckles and backs off. Good, but you won't be sleeping with your back to him just yet. Now there's another problem. You don't have any stuff. The American prisons you were in were pretty bare bones, but they still had some basic creature comforts. The beds weren't much worse than camp cots, and the bathrooms were decently supplied. Here, you're brought in with the clothes on your back and nothing else. The other guys seem to have some basics like blankets. You know a little Portuguese, and one guy named Antonio knows a little English, so you figure you'll be buddies. He explains that in Brazil, inmates need to pay for just about everything besides what you need to stay alive. Most of them have their families send them money. Great. You're in another country, in prison, and you're broke. You figure if you get in touch with your mother, she might be able to send you some money, but there's a problem. She's still locked up for credit card fraud, and her parole is at least a month away. Until then, it looks like you're going to be living rough. No food, no favors. You don't even have an actual prison uniform here. Everyone is just dressed in street clothes. You already sense that brawls could erupt between your fellow cellmates if someone gets something extra, and everyone else wants it. And it's not likely that anyone will stop a brawl. In fact, they might encourage it. You might be locked up, but this is far from the most secure prison you've been in. Back in American high-security prisons, you could barely blink without seeing a guard. Here in Compage, it's a different story. You've heard that Brazilian prisons are massively overcrowded, and if the stories are true, there aren't enough guards to keep up with the madness. That means if the opportunity presents itself, you might just be able to take advantage of some of the chaos and blow the joint. Of course, escaping is one thing, surviving is another. Once you're out, there's nothing but remote jungle, winding rivers, and hostile territory between you and civilization. And if the guards don't catch you, something else might. Guess it's time to settle in. The sun is high in the sky now, and the prison is getting pretty hot. You're not surprised that the prison doesn't have air conditioning, but at least it is decently ventilated. The air is flowing through the prison cells, but the windows are high up and barred, so there's no real risk of escape, unfortunately. You also don't see any special amenities around the cell, like the radios some inmates were allowed in American prisons, so it's going to be a long, boring day here. Or at least you thought so, because it's chow time. It's going to be another culture shock as you and your cell are led to the cafeteria. Everyone, once again, is bringing their own supplies. You didn't know you were supposed to have tableware and cutlery with you to enter prison. Fortunately, Antonio seems to have an arrangement with the rest of the cell and hands you a plastic food container. That allows you to spoon some rice and beans and a small amount of chicken from the offerings. You don't have any utensils, but you're not fussy. The food isn't exactly impressive, but it is cheap. Mass-produced Latin American grub that should scratch that hunger itch. But not everyone is in the same boat. Every prison has its own ecosystem, and there are top dogs and underdogs, and that's never clearer than at lunchtime. You notice that many inmates are carrying chips, soft drinks, and candy, no doubt from the canteen, bought with their own money. Unlike in American prisons, the canteens aren't just prison-run, they're prisoner-run. Some inmates have enough cash to stockpile supplies and sell them at ruthless markups. You'll have to get your hands on some of that money, or, find another way. But something else catches your eye, and it makes you angry. There's a section of the prison cafeteria that looks different. It has more guards around it, and only a small number of prisoners. They all look better dressed and groomed than the main group, and they're eating different food. It looks like half chickens today, a feast that most of the men here would kill for. You must be staring a little too long, because Antonio pulls you back to the table and whispers "chefe," which you know means chief. These are likely the crime bosses whose empires caught up to them. They're locked up, but they still have some pull, even here. Enough to get better food, perks in their cells, and protection from the guards. If you were on your turf, you'd be challenging them, but you think you'd meet a quick end here. You're digging through your food when a sudden roar erupts across the cafeteria, yelling, cursing, the screech of metal chairs scraping against concrete. Looks like one guy tried to snatch another's cigarettes. Bad move. Now fists are flying, trays are clattering to the floor, and the whole place is crackling with energy. You've seen this before. Best stay out of the fray and watch the show. The real action isn't the fight, it's what comes next. Any second now, the guards will come storming in, cracking skulls and dragging out anyone who's too close. And then it's a prison lockdown. Pretty routine stuff. Except that is not happening this time. A small number of guards on hand immediately escort the prison power brokers out of the line of fire, with the bosses taking their delicious-looking plates of chicken with them. And then they just leave, as the brawl continues. They'll probably be back soon enough, but now everyone is getting involved. You and Antonio are trying to make your way back to the exit when a pair of nasty-looking gang members block your way. Antonio tries to talk to them in Portuguese, but they're obviously looking for a fight. One snaps his plastic spoon in half, brandishing the sharp edge. Finally, a language you speak fluently. The guy with the stabbing spoon lunges at you, and you catch his arm with your size advantage. It's no holds barred from the look of things, so you deliver 2 sharp punches to his ribs. Antonio's a little guy, but he is holding his own against the other guy. Still, no use in not taking advantage of your size, so you grab the guy you're brawling with and you throw him directly into the other guy. Antonio wastes no time reaching into their pockets and grabbing some of their extra money. He hands some over to you. It didn't look like half, but now's not the time to debate. You run out of the cafeteria back to the cells following Antonio's lead. Sure enough, you soon hear more noise as you assume the riot squad has arrived, after making sure that the top guys are safe. Now that's more like it. A prison riot? You feel alive. As the other inmates are shuffling back to their cells, you can't shake the feeling this place is different. It's unstructured. It's not some cushy club fed where celebrities sleep off their 10th DUI in private cells. This is the real deal. This place is full of hardcore criminals, including killers, and yet it's not total chaos. It's an ecosystem. The economy runs on cigarettes, favors, and contraband. The guards don't care about the day-to-day bloodshed, just what comes in, what goes out, and keeping the prison's elite safe. You ask Antonio if he's ever seen something this crazy. His response surprises you. At least once a week. This was just a day in the life. As the day goes on, you start to see more and more evidence of just how badly run this place is. The cell has a toilet, sure. You're used to seeing other dudes go to the bathroom in front of you. It comes with the life you lead. But here, the plumbing system seems to barely function. It often takes a couple of flushes and some good luck to get things down. And the water flow in the sink is often little more than a trickle. There's a shower, if you can call it that. It's really just a pipe sticking out of the wall, and the temperature is wildly unpredictable. And also, the water is looking awfully brown. You think you're gonna hold off on that for a while. If the other guys think you stink, they're not telling you. And you're starting to think about how you're actually going to live here. Noise is a constant inside the prison, with the sound of other inmates shouting and arguing echoing through the halls. You assume it'll get quieter during the night, but how much quieter? You're going to have to memorize some of the voices in here so you can deliver some beatings if they interrupt your beauty sleep in the coming nights. But then it's not surprising. The cell you're in is designed for 1 or 2 people, and it's currently holding 6. And these are some of the more well-behaved inmates. Some of the other cells must be a cage match. Of course, one of the biggest problems of prison is it's boring. The prison is more chaotic than some you've been in, but that doesn't make it much more fun. In fact, as a closed-regime prison, it's actually much less interesting than some of the state prisons you've been in the US. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of extracurricular activities here, and no one seems eager to take you guys out to the yard for exercise. You're guessing that some of those dumbbells would have been used for a purpose other than lifting weights, if lunch was any indication. You busy yourself flipping through a beat-up magazine in Portuguese. It's not yours, but no one's stopping you. Most of the words go over your head, but some of the pictures are actually pretty funny. Soon enough, another knock comes at the cell door. It's dinner time. You're not normally the nervous type, but you have to admit lunch was a little jarring. Not only was it a full-on display of the prison's class structure, but it didn't take anything for the whole thing to erupt in chaos. And you've got the feeling that you just saw the beginning of how bad it could get. This time, you're not concentrating on the food as much, although the beef stew they're serving doesn't smell too bad. But you're keeping your eye on the people around you, because if something breaks out, you want to be ready. You and Antonio seem to be sticking together right now, and you're fine with that. He knows the ins and outs of the place, and you're big enough to provide some extra protection for the young gang member. It's like when that nerd at school did your homework and you beat up the other bullies. But you don't think he has any real ties to the more powerful gangs in the prison. They are currently dining on roast beef behind a phalanx of guards, so nothing has really changed here. The food portions are small and there isn't much meat in the stew, but it'll do for now. So you gulp it down and you get back to people watching. And it's not long before things go south once again. Sure enough, there's a fight between 2 gang members and the guards step in to break it up. And that's when it happens. One of the fighters grabs a guard by the neck and holds a sharpened plastic tool to him. Suddenly, the guards are no longer paying attention to the VIPs, and they're surrounding the hostage taker. There's a lot of yelling in Portuguese, and everyone's watching. It seems like the guards could open fire at any second, and they don't even notice several other prisoners breaking from the crowd. Suddenly, 3 inmates make their move for one of the gang lords eating in the protected area. You knew the gangs had rivals in prison, but they never stopped trying to kill each other, even behind bars. And what started as a small conflagration has now turned into complete chaos, as pretty much everyone takes sides and begins brawling with members of the rival gangs. And here you are a member of neither. You're a newcomer, and Antonio is a member of a lower-tier gang without much of a power position. So that means you should be fine, right? Not so much. That means it's open season on both of you. And that also means that in the middle of this madness, anything you do will likely not get much attention. So you decide you're going to just punch anything that comes at you. Hey, you are getting some exercise after all. But this isn't just a brawl, this was a planned attack. You've heard about this before, and it's nothing. The gang wars in prisons get extremely bloody, and Compage is one of the worst. Before you got here, the prison was the site of what was known as the New Year's Massacre. It was a brutal series of killings that involved mass hostage-taking of guards and staff, and a gunfight that was abetted by guns and knives being smuggled in by family members. In total, 57 inmates were killed on site, and the prison was locked down for a good long time afterward. But you're not looking to get in on the killing, you have another plan. The chaos is going to be raging for a while, and you motion to Antonio to follow you out of the cafeteria. But that's not going to protect you completely. The fighting is spilled out into the halls as the guards try to regain control. But with many of them trying to protect the VIP prisoners, the understaffed prison is in chaos. That might just give you the opening you're looking for, an exit. If there ever was a time to escape from the prison, it's during one of these riots. Except if it was that easy, everyone would do it. You and your buddy sneak your way around corners, but every potential exit has an armed guard posted. You see one that looks all clear, but a guard jumps out pointing a gun at you. He's angry and he looks ready to shoot. So Antonio takes point and delivers what sounds like a pretty believable sob story about trying to escape the violence and looking for a place to hide. The guard seems skeptical, but leads the two of you back to your cell on the second floor under close watch at gunpoint. But hey, it's better than where some of the others are headed. The brawl seems to have been put down by now, and you can see dozens of inmates being led away in handcuffs down to the lowest level, the punishment cells. These places are infamous, similar to solitary that you've experienced in American prisons. They're little more than a darkened concrete box for anyone who crosses the line. And the cells in Brazil are especially rough, due to the unventilated area of the prison making them brutally hot in the summer and miserably cold in the winter. You've got plans to get out of here, but they don't involve anything that could get you sent down there. And that's still a better fate than the several body bags you've seen being toted away from the cafeteria chaos. I guess not everyone got away. It's been a hell of a first day in the compage as the lights go out and you prepare to try to fall asleep. Tomorrow will likely be more of the same. This is a brutal place, endlessly violent, with an every-man-for-himself atmosphere that lends itself to conflict. It'll take a hard person to survive here, and you have a feeling you're just going to get harder and harder. Eyes down, you focus on the chipped, bloody floor as you wait for your first taste of prisoner chow. Scenes from every prison movie flash in your head. Sit by the wrong guy, and lunch might be served with a side of shattered teeth. You throw a friendly, let's be real, borderline creepy smile at the server, the portion god himself. Today's menu: slow braised short rib, Parmesan mashed potatoes, truffle mac and cheese. Don't believe us? Keep watching. This is the Infographics Show. What prison food is really like. Alright, we lied to you. Prison food is more like tubes of mystery meat on a bed of radioactive mashed potato, accompanied by a dollop of super adhesive mac and cheese. The veg, a handful of traumatized green beans that look like they've been to war. 800 years from now, archaeologists will study it and wonder if this was our version of cruel and unusual punishment. There is a good reason why 90% of prisoners try to avoid prison food. It sucks with a capital S. And you'll soon find out why. Just one look at an average meal in an American prison is enough to make you pledge allegiance to Nancy Reagan's ghost, vowing to never jaywalk again. It's a symphony of bland beige that resembles dog puke. A sad plate of nope. As any dietitian will tell you, this isn't usually a good sign. Colors matter. The food, can we call it that, is supposed to follow what the Department of Corrections calls dietary guidelines for Americans. It's also supposed to embrace nutrient diversity, although supposed to and does are very different things. If color is anything to go by, it's about as diverse as an amoeba. Not long ago, Dakota County Jail served bologna, bread, and water every night, 365 days a year. This was served up 14 hours after the only other meal, breakfast. Prisoners still got 2,700 calories a day in the form of a never-ending bologna nightmare. U.S. prisoners are mentally scarred by it. Grown men weep at the sight of processed slices of meat. But what does the Bureau of Prisons mean by dietary guidelines for Americans? As all of our viewers know, the U.S. is a bastion of nutritious cuisine, celebrated worldwide for its culinary health excellence. At an average of 3,600 calories a day, Americans consume well over their required daily intake, much of it made up of future leg-amputating added sugars. But prison inmates are not so lucky. The DOC claims to provide its male prisoners with 2,600 to 2,800 calories daily, while women should be getting around 2,000 calories a day. But as any prisoner will tell you, it's more than likely you'll spend most of your prison days feeling hungry. The truth is, in a lot of U.S. prisons, you might only get 1,800 calories a day. And that's not so much when you spend most of your day trying to stay in shape to fend off the next guy ready to stab you over a missing crayon. We looked at a typical breakfast in an Oklahoma prison, which was so lacking in color that it almost had stealth capabilities. It featured a slice of white bread, 2 boiled eggs, some powdered scrambled eggs, and the worst part, a mound of congealed cereal that looks suspiciously like the contents of a formula-fed baby diaper. Still, in U.S. prisons, you're supposed to get 6 servings of fruits and veggies per day, whole grains twice a day, and 28 grams of protein at a minimum. There will be regular servings of milk and sweetened juice. The problem is it's also so incredibly bland and practically inedible. In New York State, almost 92% of prisoners in a survey said the food was tasteless. Nearly 96% said that they preferred to make their own meals with food from the commissary. But that causes its own problems. The healthy stuff in the commissary costs more than the unhealthy stuff. So unless you have a hustle-running spice, the non-food version, you might struggle to get the nutrients you need. Now, some of you might be thinking, do the crime, do the time. No one ever said prison was gonna be easy. Okay, but is it fair to serve prisoners something only marginally better than the food you'd serve your pet Cocker Spaniel? Let us know in the comments. The sheer lack and vile quality of U.S. prison food has sparked riots and made prison guards enemy number one. In a human rights-based study, good food was said to improve not just prisoner health, but also cut back on the levels of violence and recidivism. The U.S. has some of the highest reoffending rates in the world. Almost 70% of prisoners are arrested again within 3 years of release. Okay, we can't just blame the food, but it probably doesn't help. 9 out of 10 prisoners in the U.S.'s 1.5 million prison population said that they didn't get enough food. A disturbing 3 out of 4 said they'd been served spoiled or rotten food. So they either don't get enough or they can't eat it because it smells like decomposing hamburger meat scraped from corpse teeth. Prisoners often report losing weight fast. An investigation at the Montgomery County Jail in New York said that one male prisoner lost 90 pounds in less than 6 months while existing on the standard prison diet. Another prisoner in a different prison said he ate everything he was served each day and lost 25 pounds in 4 months. He explained, "I couldn't wait to go home, restart my life, and eat a diet that didn't kill me." At Georgia's Gordon County Jail, investigations showed prisoners were getting over 2,800 calories a day. Even so, they got breakfast and dinner, but no lunch. The wait was so long that some of the inmates said they started licking syrup packets. As for the biscuit and gravy for breakfast, we would not be exaggerating if we said we could put that gravy in a video about the world's worst tortures. The cup of creamed wheat at the Bow County Jail in Montana was another dish that aesthetically falls within the descriptive parameters of hot vomit. The average American spends around $8 a day on food, but if you land in prison in Florida, your daily allowance will be about $2.32. In California, it's $2.45 a day. These are two of the most packed prison states in the country, with 199,000 and 157,000. Only Texas has more, with 219,000 inmates, and there the daily food budget is even lower, at $2.22. To put that into perspective, that is less than half the cost of a box of fresh-cut watermelon at Target. And in prison, they're making 3 meals out of it. One of our writers at the Infographics show once spent a summer working at a massive plant that produced prison food. Let's just say this food wasn't exactly made with love and care. According to him, the workers at the plant had about as much experience making food as they did designing spaceships. These plants buy in bulk, going for the cheapest foodstuffs they can find. Our staff member described how ingredients were piled onto conveyor belts from giant plastic tubs, handled by workers who were often untrained and poorly paid. His job was to monitor food temperatures at each stage, trying to prevent bacterial spread, a tough task given the scale of operations. In a 2017 study, it was found that there were 200 foodborne disease outbreaks in American prisons, resulting in over 20,600 illnesses, 204 hospitalizations, and 5 people dying. As any inmate who worked in the kitchen will tell you, food arrives in prison in huge bags and containers. When it's Taco Tuesday, the ready-made sauce is poured into large vats. From start to finish, it's an industrial process. It's almost impossible to make this much food taste good. It is basically slop, more suitable to pigs than humans. Back in the 2000s, under the infamous human rights breaching Sheriff Joe Arpaio, in Arizona's Maricopa County, meal costs dropped to as low as 15 to 40 cents each. Any cheaper and it would disappear. One former prison resident, the British ecstasy kingpin turned YouTuber Sean Atwood, said one of the meals was nicknamed Red Death. It was a slop made with mystery ingredients, including the occasional extra protein from a dead rat. He actually said that. Now let's look at what's on offer in the prison commissary. Here, prisoners might get a maximum spending budget of $350 a month, although in some prisons it might be as little as $35 a week. In line with the USA's famed diagonal-shaped rates of diabetes, a lot of products in the commissary are the ultra-processed kind. A 2024 study said the prevalence of diabetes among non-incarcerated individuals is high, but the prevalence is considerably worse in our prisons and jails. It's not just diabetes. According to the Department of Justice, 44% of people serving time in state or federal prisons report ever having a chronic illness. That's compared to 31% of the general population. In short, prison food makes you sick. For $3.50 at the commissary, you can treat yourself to a tube of jalapeno squeeze cheese, packed with nutritional goodies like sorbic acid and xanthan gum. If you're feeling fancy, Nutella hazelnut spread is available for $4.90. On the healthier side, there is stuffed chicken with rice for $5.75. Prisoners say they long for the days when food looked like food. Anything served on the bone is highly prized. It is one of the rare times inmates will set aside their commissary snacks. Still, mystery meat reigns as the prison staple. When food glows, you know there's an issue. One prisoner described a meat dish he used to get that was gray in color with a slightly iridescent sheen to it. In Michigan, another prisoner described the meatballs as fluorescent. At least they helped brighten up the cell, we suppose. The question on every prisoner's mind is, what is this stuff? Chicken? Pork? Beef? It all tastes similar and usually looks the same. A former prisoner who worked in the kitchen explained, there was this box of meat that said turkey parts on it. The shape of the meat is not like any part of turkey I've ever seen. Another former prisoner said, imagine eating bologna that smells like fish for 18 years. This is the cheapest mystery meat America has to offer. Think offal, bits of organs, or whatever can be scraped off a carcass via mechanical separation. Sure, gas station hot dogs might come close, but let's not forget prison meat is part of a daily meal plan costing less than $3. There's also the bonus of the food making you sick. You not only get the cheapest cuts in prison, but you also usually get the most lax health and safety standards. In 2014, 30 prisoners in Michigan came down with food poisoning when it was discovered maggots and fly larvae were crawling around next to the food trays. It's just as bad for the women as it is for the men in prison in terms of food. A female kitchen worker at an unnamed prison recently shared a very short story in the horror genre of nonfiction. The hot dog was very dark and the beans had what appeared to be bugs on it. Closer inspection revealed a ton of unhatched maggots. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported that U.S. prison inmates are 6.4 times more likely to suffer from a food-related illness than Americans on the outside. Outbreaks are common. Recently, Mississippi prisons dropped a food provider after serving meals described as spoiled, rotten, moldy, or uncooked. Photos of the meals looked like a dog on death's door vomit, from bright yellow slop to a sauce that might be named essence of diarrhea. Unsurprisingly, kitchen staff also spotted food marked not for human consumption. It's the reason why some prisoners pretend they're Jewish or Muslim when they've never been within 100 feet of a synagogue or a mosque. By faking it, they might get kosher or halal food. As for vegetarians and vegans, that doesn't fall under religion, so you won't be getting special treatment. You'll just have to trade food items with other prisoners or hope you have enough cash to live on commissary goods. Even then, your choices are severely limited. Still, if you're lucky enough to be dying or are very sick, a prison physician might put you on a special meal plan. There's no guarantee this will be safe from maggots or rat poop, but the food might be low in sugars and fats. One inmate said at his prison one of the most popular commissary foods was noodles. Cheese curls, chips, and Jolly Ranchers came next. Number one by far, he said, were Little Debbie cakes. To put it another way, if you plan to live on commissary food for years on end, there's a good chance you'll be rolling out of prison in a wheelchair. A recent investigation revealed that commissary food might be 5 times more expensive than the same goods on the outside. The study said the prices reveal an exploitative, inconsistent system, which marks up goods as much as 600%. A 35-cent pack of ramen at Target becomes a 40-cent plus packet in prison. Noodles were 57 cents in Missouri prisons, and that same brand was $1.06 in Florida prisons. It all depends on which blood-sucking, price-gouging company is supplying the prison. Going to prison is like playing Indignity Dominoes. It's just one poop sandwich after another, sometimes literally if you count the rat feces. As the van barrels down the highway, you're locked in the back, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals in full body armor. Another sits directly across from you, silent, expressionless, his eyes never leaving yours. The walls are padded and the windows are blacked out. It's just you, these 3 men, and a bunch of Glock 22s. Your handcuffs have been triple locked, and your hands sweat inside a pair of oversized mittens. Chains bind your ankles and wrap tight around your waist. Every bump in the road sends a jolt of pain through your body. There's no real chance of escape, but these guys are treating you like Hannibal Lecter. Sure, you can be violent, you can be extreme, but only when you've got no other choice. There was never even a warning that you were going to be transferred. At about 4 a.m., correctional officers burst into your special housing unit or SHU cell and strip searched you. They handed you off to the marshals, who haven't said a word beyond barking at you to keep quiet. The fact that you're in a van and not on what they call Con Air tells you one thing: you're not going far. Around 6 hours later, the van comes to a halt. You can hear the faint crackle of radios and a series of gates opening as the heavy electronic doors grind open and sunlight pours into the van. You squint against the blinding light and you can make out 4 officers waiting on the tarmac, 3 of them armed with AR-15s and another with a shotgun, and they're all in full body armor. You have never seen security this tight. One officer grabs you and leads you like a dog out of the van. All around you and far into the distance is desert, a vast expanse of dust against a backdrop of mountains. There are floodlights standing high above the walls and razor wire fences glistening in the sunshine. You can see 5 or 6 circular guard towers where men are standing with rifles, and they're watching your every move. The lead officer shoves you toward an entrance tunnel covered with sensors and motion cameras. Inside the building, there are more and more armed officers as you walk through metal detectors. This is nothing like the intake routine of regular prisons. It is deathly quiet and immaculately clean. The people working here are all focused on one thing: you. It feels closer to medical quarantine than prison. It is sterile and dehumanizing, like you're a walking contagion. A door opens into a bare room where there's a counter with a man standing behind it. The armed officers push you toward the wall, and the man behind the counter tells you that you will now be strip searched. This used to feel humiliating, but the fact is, after almost 2 years of incarceration, you know the procedure. So you take off your jogging bottoms, your t-shirt, and your underwear, and you're ordered to turn around. You start to move, but just before your eyes leave the man, you catch a glimpse of him slipping on a pair of rubber gloves. This is what you might call a rude awakening. You didn't think cavity searches were even legal anymore for prison inductions. The officer tells you that it's standard procedure here for certain prisoners, and failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. You have the right to make a complaint to the Bureau of Prisons, but given your history of extreme violence, the prison deems a body cavity search is a reasonable precaution under State Department of Corrections policies. When the search is over, the officer runs his hands through your hair and shines a torch in your ears and mouth, checking the space around your teeth. When it's over, they throw you your new prison clothes, an orange jumpsuit with a Velcro opening on the chest, and a small one for when you want to pee. Your shoes are wafer thin, like they're made out of cotton, but with rubber soles. You are immediately sent to another room where there's a bed. A male doctor takes your pulse and checks your blood pressure, asking you about previous illnesses or chronic conditions. He wants to know if you take medications or have taken them recently. No, you say, thinking about that study that you read that said 38 to 42% of inmates in U.S. jails and prisons were taking medications for chronic conditions when they arrived there. Almost 30% of them for psychiatric stuff, mostly depression. 2 in 5 U.S. inmates have a mental illness, twice the rate as on the outside. You also remember reading that about 50% didn't get the meds in prison that they were taking when they were free. Maybe that's one of the reasons why you had so many fights in your last place. Half of those inmates were probably mentally unstable. Maybe you are. Then comes the mental health evaluation. Truth be told, since you got arrested, you have gone from mentally stable to mentally wobbly. But no, you tell the smartly dressed female psychologist sitting across from you, you wouldn't consider yourself depressed or anxious, and no, you've never experienced psychosis. But if there is one thing you hate, it's isolation. The SHU drove you crazy in the other place, but you decide not to tell her that because the fact is, it wouldn't matter. You once saw a 2011 study that mentioned 30% of all U.S. inmates will engage in self-injurious behavior at least once while they're locked up, including 50% of women. In a more specific New York study, consisting of over 240,000 jail inmates, only 7.3% of the men went to solitary confinement, but they made up 53.3% of acts of self-harm and 45% of cases of taking self-harm to the next level. The conclusion? Men in solitary were 7 times more likely to hurt themselves than other prisoners. The evidence is clear that isolation often causes serious psychological distress, and you are about to experience the most isolated conditions in U.S. prison existence. The purpose of super maximum security is not to fix, but to break. This isn't rehabilitation. This is carefully structured degradation. When all the prodding and the questioning is over, it's time for the orientation. With your handcuffs and your shackles still clinging to your body, the same 4 armed officers escort you down a bright white hall to a door with a finger and an eye scanner. It all feels so unnecessary, this level of security. But then you remember the story of an inmate in a Supermax attacking 3 officers in 2016, leaving them all with life-threatening injuries. Attacks are rare, but they can certainly happen. In the office, a man with a shirt and a tie introduces himself as the orientation officer. He explains that there are various wings in the prison, some more high security than others. He's letting you know that there are circles of hell, and whatever you might think is bad can get worse. He says that you'll be going to the general population, which is essentially a high-tech SHU. You won't interact with any other prisoners on the unit floor, and you're not supposed to engage in chit-chat with the officers. If you have a complaint or a question, you can request to speak, but other than that, there will be disciplinary action if you open your mouth when told not to. You will eat in the cell 3 times a day, collecting the food through a hole in the door. You'll shower in the same room, the water being turned on once in the morning each day. You must use it or there will be disciplinary action for neglecting personal hygiene. Dirt will not be tolerated in any form whatsoever. Still, you have heard that in some maximum security facilities, the showers are outside of the cells, and because of the effort it takes to move the inmates around, they only get 2 or 3 showers a week. You guess that you have a better deal than those guys. Visits are not often available, and you must request them a month in advance. They can be taken away without warning at any time. They are a privilege, not a guarantee. If you get put in a more secure unit, you'll get nothing. Indeed, if you misbehave, you'll be sent to a higher control unit where your privileges are fewer. If you misbehave again, you might be sent to the Special Security Unit or SSU, where the cells are soundproofed and there is 0 interaction with anyone. You will live in total silence, and you'll have to earn the right to receive books, writing equipment, or TV. But he says if you follow the rules, and maybe a year from now, you could make it to a less secure unit as part of the step-down program. This is decided by the multidisciplinary committee that you'll meet with once a month. In the program, you'd occasionally be trusted to mix with other inmates. You get yard time with them outside of a cage. You get access to computers 3 hours a day outside of your cell and 300 phone minutes a month. But one single transgression and you'd be removed from the program. You are dangerous, he says, and will be treated as a threat all the time that you're in this prison. But do as you're told, he says, and you might earn yourself a transfer back to a less secure prison. There's no work program, he explains, but you can earn the privilege of cleaning if you prove yourself to be trustworthy. There isn't a library, but there will be a selection of books that you can choose from, and these will be prison approved. Once you've been over the rules, the armed officers escort you down to another set of seemingly endless bright white corridors leading to a security vestibule. The officer does the scans, and it opens to a large circular area, a kind of white panopticon, with cells spaced around 2 floors and a small circular officer unit in the middle. There's an unlocking sound, and out walks an officer who introduces himself as the unit boss. He explains the basics. You're monitored 24/7, even in the shower. If you call an officer without a serious reason, such as an illness or something breaking in the cell, there will be disciplinary action. There is to be no shouting, ever. That's the main difference here to the SHU. In the SHU, prisoners scream at each other all day long. Here you could hear a pin drop. Tomorrow, he says, you'll get approximately 60 minutes of yard time with restricted movement. This privilege can be taken away at any time. Some weeks you won't get any yard, he says. It's not your place to ask why. A thick steel door to your cell opens automatically to reveal another door, a set of standard prison bars. The interior is all poured concrete, but at least it looks modern. It's so clean you could eat off the floor. There's a TV monitor built into the wall behind the bars, a concrete bed opposite a concrete shelf, and a concrete table. There isn't a window, but a small slit in the far wall covered with what looks like very thick translucent glass. You can't see anything through it, but at least it shows you that there is light in the world outside. The cell is about 7 feet by 12 feet, bigger than the cell you had before. There isn't a bathroom, but a hole in the ceiling for the shower. There isn't even a faucet. That too is just a hole. There is literally nothing you could grab hold of and manipulate. Once the inner bars are locked, they take off your chains and handcuffs. It's a relief. You've been in them all day now, and it's already close to evening. First things first, the TV. There are 2 channels that you can change by pressing a touch button. One of them features a Christian minister giving a sermon, and the other is a man explaining how cheddar cheese is made. Both channels are black and white. In the orientation, you were told that you could work up to the privilege of sports, but right now, those 2 channels feel like televisual torture. After an hour or so, some food comes through a trap door on a rubber plate. It looks like a block of hardened vomit containing what might be bits of processed meat with peas and carrots mixed into a sludge. You guess this is what they call Nutriloaf. tastes as disgusting as it looks, like food you'd give to your dog if you hated it. You only eat half of it, even though you're starving, and then you sit back on the bed as the slit of the window reveals daytime outside must be turning to night. You've really only had one thought for the last few hours: how do people get through this? You remember reading that on any given day, about 122,000 inmates in the US are in solitary, in prison or jail, and about a third are doing over 15 days. At least 6,000 will spend a year or more in isolation. You recall what those academics said, that the men who spent months or even years in isolation, some as much as 5 to 20 years, usually developed severe anxiety, depression, and often paranoia. Some went psychotic, hallucinating cellies that they could talk to. There was a lawsuit launched by prisoners in 2012 against an infamous Supermax prison. It said some of the inmates screamed and wailed all night for days or weeks on end, finding anything they could to hurt themselves. They would search high and low for something sharp. They'd swallow it, and as blood spilled from their mouth, they were glad to finally get some attention in that hellish place which demanded total silence. People die when they starve themselves of food, but if you starve the brain of human interaction, it destroys sanity. Brain scans have even shown how sensory deprivation can kill neurons, affecting your ability to think and remember. As all this goes through your mind, you hear a sound come through the toilet bowl. Someone shouting through the pipes. You know from your shoe days this is what they call the booty scoot. You're aware that you could scoop out the water and use a toilet roll to shout back and listen, but you're too depressed to bother. The lights dim and you drift off to sleep. The lights in the cell come on automatically at 5 a.m. Since your cell door closed yesterday, you haven't heard a sound from the outside. Not a voice, not a bell, or a bang. The silence is frightening, madness-inducing, and on the TV it's either more sermons or a woman explaining how her company makes artisanal soaps from locally sourced goat milk. The flap of the trapdoor opens and in comes breakfast in another rubber tray. It's better than the fare from your last place. 2 eggs, actual real bacon, porridge, toast, margarine, jam, 2 bananas, and some coffee. After breakfast, you walk from one end of the cell to the other about 100 times, stopping to watch 2 hours of sermons and learn about all the great things you could do with recycled corn husks. There's more shouting through the toilet bowl, but you can't bring yourself to speak. Who is that guy? He is certainly persistent. And finally, it is recreation time, but first another strip search, followed by the cuffs and leg chains. 3 armed officers take you down a corridor into a covered yard. You look up and you see the roof, thinking it's almost sadistic to deny prisoners sunlight when they could easily give it to them. They march you to a set of what looks like shark cages covered in mesh, so you're in a cage, inside another cage, and your body is covered in chains. Then another fella is placed in the next cage. There's a gap between you, but you are close enough to speak quietly. He says he's been trying to contact you through the pipes, but you haven't responded. He tells you they mess with the pipes in Supermax so prisoners can't communicate. With good behavior, he tells you they'll let you out on the court and give you a basketball. If you want to stay sane, he says, get a rubber pen from the commissary and start writing letters to anyone who will listen. This guy has been here for 2 years already. He said he was kicked off of the step-down program for trying to help another prisoner who was going insane. The conversation ends the second the guard spots you. Before you can react, 2 more guards are already moving in. You feel a firm hand on your shoulder dragging you back. You don't resist, there's no point. It would only mean more trouble. The guards haul you away without another word. The guy that you were talking to doesn't even look back. You're dragged across the yard, under the watchful eyes of the sharpshooters in the towers. You're pushed through the door, leading back into the block. One of the guards mutters something under his breath, but you can't make it out. You're too busy thinking about what's about to happen. The guards open your cell door, shove you inside, and slam it behind you. You turn around, rubbing your shoulder, and look toward the TV. It's gone. You just lost your one perk. The hours drag. You've got nothing but your thoughts racing through your mind. No books, no television, no distractions, just silence. You think about that conversation in the yard and how fast it all went wrong. And it's only been 1 day. Explosions rip through the prison as grenades detonate against the wall separating 2 cell blocks. When the smoke clears, men surge through the gaping hole carrying pistols and machetes and start hunting down other inmates in a brutal rampage. This isn't prison, it's a war zone. Prisons are supposed to be about rehabilitation, but the reality is a lot more violent. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're going to take you through the most insane prison fights ever. Number 6. Thai prison fight. You might think that prison fights are spontaneous, and they usually are. But in some countries, they're part of a well-organized tournament run by private organizations. The prisoners' prize? Their freedom. In Thailand, the Department of Corrections launched a policy in partnership with the business's Prison Fight, creating Muay Thai and boxing tournaments for prisoners. It's not as random an idea as it might sound. There is historical precedent for Thai prisoners fighting their way to freedom. Back in 1767, during a brutal war between Burma and Thailand, thousands of Thai soldiers were captured by the Burmese. Instead of being executed or imprisoned indefinitely, they were given a shot at freedom by fighting. However, those were prisoners of war. In Bangkok's Klong Prem prison, the people fighting for their freedom may be behind bars for more legit reasons, like murdering someone. Section 5 of Klong Prem is home to both lifers and inmates with boxing or Muay Thai experience who want to train and compete. Prison guards scout other wings for potential fight candidates. In the world's most depressing draft, prisoners run up and down a long central corridor for cardio, push their limits with basic workout equipment, and even sharpen their skills in a makeshift boxing ring set up inside the facility. Defenders of the system argue that it encourages discipline in prisoners and gives them a general purpose, but for the organization involved in the fights, it seems to be more about entertainment. Prison Fight hosts the full-contact Muay Thai bouts, where inmates are pitted against visiting foreign fighters, outsiders who want to test their skills against hardened criminals. Prisoners must compete in 5 to 8 matches, accounts vary, and if they perform well enough they might get a reduction on their sentence, or even freedom. Anyone who loses a round goes back to the general population. Win all rounds and you can get your very own get-out-of-jail-free card. So how do you schedule an organized fight in prison? Well, attendees need to go through security checks and searches before entering the prison. On the guest list, you'll find fighters, production crew from the Prison Fight show, yes, there is a show, and a handful of select guests, all seated amongst the inmate population. Food and drinks are served, making it feel like a fight night party, except it's behind bars. When the first prisoner steps into the ring, the crowd of inmates watching erupts into fierce cheers. The atmosphere is electric. One of their own is getting a potential shot at freedom. He begins with a ram muay, an elaborate traditional dance that warms the fighter up and shows off his skills, balance, and attitude. Once he's done, his opponent, a fighter from Scotland, steps into the ring. But like most other foreign fighters, he doesn't stand a chance. The inmate is fighting for his freedom. The foreign fighter just signed up for a cool but brutal experience. The inmate easily beats his opponent, winning the fight. The day goes on like that, with bouts of Muay Thai and boxing fights. The prisoners usually win, though not always. The owner of Prison Fight, Estonian businessman Kirill Sukur, bills this as a rehabilitation program. We do this to give the fighters an experience and also to give something back to the country. But the program is very controversial, with many people questioning the logic of making violent offenders even better at fighting. If that's not bad enough, they then release the man most effective at beating others up into society. Not to mention, the severity of their crimes doesn't seem to be taken into consideration. Drug lords, murderers, and hitmen can fight for freedom right alongside those who committed lesser offenses. In fact, people who have longer or life sentences are more incentivized to participate in the program as they see no other way out. Occasionally, however, someone will make an international name for themselves this way. Siraporn Tawisuk won the WBC Female Light Flyweight World Boxing title while behind bars at Klong Prem. At least the organized fights in Thailand have rules, structure, and some level of control. This next one spiraled into chaos and fast. Number 5. A deadly U.S. prison riot. A relatively small event incited one of the deadliest mass prison fights in the last 25 years of U.S. history. On April 15, 2018, in the Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, South Carolina, the evening was progressing like any other. Okay, well, there might have been a little tension in the air. People were huddled around the common area known as the Rock, playing cards, watching the NBA playoffs, and generally passing the time. But the prison was dominated by 3 gangs: the Bloods, the Gangster Disciples, and the Crips, who weren't exactly friendly with each other. And that meant the smallest thing could trigger an avalanche of violence. DeMonte Rivera, one of the disciples, entered a cell in the F3 housing unit to rob it. Meanwhile, other inmates acted as lookouts. The cell's resident, Michael Millage, also known as a supplier and possessor of almost everything you could imagine in a prison: drugs, phones, weapons, and money. To this day, no one is sure exactly what motivated the robbery, possibly Millage's TV, contraband, a secret cell phone stash, or just pure boredom, but it went wrong, very wrong. Millage resisted Rivera's intrusion, and in return Rivera pulled out a shank and stabbed him multiple times. Things went downhill from there. A member of the Bloods heard Millage's cries and saw Rivera leaving the cell and went to confront him. Before Rivera could say a word, the inmate stabbed him in the neck, escalating things even further. Almost immediately, armed prisoners rushed in, swarming the common area. Two ran into Millage's cell and saw him bleeding out on the floor, barely breathing. They desperately looked for a guard for help, but the prison was chronically understaffed. Seeing how things were progressing and realizing no guards were coming to calm things down, other inmates fled back to their cells, locking themselves in. Meanwhile, members of the Gangster Disciples and the Crips started hunting down Raymond Scott, one of the highest-ranking Bloods in the prison. They wanted revenge for the stabbing of one of their own, after he had stabbed someone else, of course. But Scott wasn't in the F3 housing unit, so the gang members spread out, overrunning other units, eventually getting to the F5 unit that housed Scott. After spotting him, they pulled out knives and chased him down. Scott and fellow inmate Joshua Jenkins tried to escape, but to no avail. They were murdered in cold blood. All of these events set off a vicious cycle of violence that increasingly spiraled out of control as the night went on. As news of Scott's murder spread, his fellow Bloods decided to chase after any Crips they could find in revenge. They infiltrated the F1 housing unit, one of the closest to the administration buildings, and viciously attacked Crips members living there. Even hardened criminals fled the sudden outburst of violence, running into the other wings or inside of cells to escape. But there was a problem. The metal security doors in the prison had been left unlocked. Doors to cells, doors to various wings were all unlocked, especially in F5, where the locking system slid doors shut using air pressure. The inmates had already figured out how to override it months ago. People fleeing and trying to find shelter in other wings had to hold the metal doors shut against the incoming tide of assailants. They were quickly overwhelmed, with the gang members breaking glass windows and doors to get through to them. Any resistance was quickly extinguished after the rampaging gang members pepper sprayed the inmates. In the midst of all the chaos, Officer Mingo signed into her shift as a prison guard, preparing to be the only guard overseeing a unit containing 256 men. As soon as she walked in, she saw men armed with shanks and axes, aggressive and yelling, pouring out of the B wing. Figuring that 256 men, many of them armed, against one person is pretty bad odds, she ran into the A wing for protection. She sought refuge in the cell of an inmate that she was relatively friendly with. Together, they barricaded her inside the cell for her protection. While locked up, she saw inmates drag DeMonte Rivera's bloody, broken body into the space right in front of her cell. She pleaded for the men to stop, but they casually glanced at her way and told her to just back up. If you come on the wing, you're gonna get killed. By the end of the day, 7 inmates lie dead, with many more injured. A shockingly deadly prison riot within U.S. borders. In addition to the gang rivalries in place in the prison, the government found that understaffing, overcrowding, and general horrible conditions contributed to the violence. In 2021, $92 million was invested into improving the prison. Sometimes it's not the prisoners who instigate the violence. Number 4. San Francisco deputy-led brawls. In 2015, a disturbing allegation about San Francisco's County Jail No. 4 came to light. 4 deputies operating under ringleader Deputy Scott New had forced inmates to engage in gladiator-style fights, but unlike in Thailand, it wasn't for a shot at freedom. This was for the deputies' amusement. In what may come as no surprise, Deputy Scott New had previously been accused of mistreatment of inmates in 2006 and had settled out of court. Deputies selected prisoners they wanted to fight, preferably as uneven a match as possible to make the brawl more entertaining. They approached 150-pound Rico Paliquico Garcia and offered him a deal. Either he fought one of his fellow prisoners, or the deputies would beat him up, cuff him, and tase him all at the same time. According to the inmate's public defender, Jeff Adachi, the men were told there was a hamburger in it for them if they won the fight, so Garcia didn't have many choices. Then they approached the biggest man in the ward, 350-pound Stanley Harris, and offered him a similar deal, except New had already decided that he would bet on Harris, so he wanted to do a little something extra to get the inmate in shape for the fight. He tormented Harris into training and doing constant push-ups. Once, according to Harris, New made him do 200 push-ups within an hour, threatening to assault him the whole time if Harris couldn't do it. The deputies then took the 2 men up to the 7th floor of the prison, where they had already determined the fight would be staged. They only gave the following rules. Just don't punch the face so no one can basically see the marks, but anything goes other than the face. They also told the prisoners that if they dared seek medical attention for their injuries, the guards would beat them. If they absolutely needed attention, they should say they fell out of their beds. Harris struck a few blows against Garcia, breaking his ribs and bruising him up, but the smaller Garcia managed to get Harris into a headlock, angering New, who had money riding on this after all. Eventually, Harris tapped out. New, enraged, dragged him off to get him to train for round 2, allegedly saying he does not like to lose money. When the allegations were made and the court started investigating the matter, all 4 deputies were put on leave, but the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. The 2 inmates involved were transferred to another prison, where New couldn't get to them. Both men also received a $90,000 settlement. The next fight shows that in prison, even the smallest thing can escalate into bloodshed, like Cake Day. Number 3. The Littoral Riots. On September 28, 2021, violence erupted inside one of Ecuador's most infamous prisons, Littoral Penitentiary. Tensions had been building for a while after the infamous leader of the Los Choneros gang, Jorge Luis Zambrano, linked with the Sinaloa drug cartel, had been killed a few months after his release from prison. It led to smaller gangs breaking off from Los Choneros and attacking their former leaders, each of them vying for control. And these fights weren't just being carried out in the streets, but in the prisons themselves. The incident that started the fight was, of all things, a birthday party. At the September 24th, 25th birthday celebration of Junior Roldan, a Los Choneros leader, the gang went around boasting how they were the most powerful gang in the prison. This irritated the gangs that had left them, especially Los Lobos and Los Tigrones. On the morning of September 28th at 9:30 a.m., tensions boiled over. Earlier that week, a drone had dropped a parcel onto the prison patio. Inside was ammunition. Weapons had already been smuggled into the prison for weeks, along with the inmates' food. Ecuador's prison system is chronically understaffed and severely overcrowded, with just 1,500 guards responsible for overseeing 39,000 inmates. So when explosions rocked the facility, blasting holes in the walls of wards 8 and 9, the guards and even the prison cooks didn't stick around to find out what came next. They ran. One account said that Los Choneros in Ward 5 wanted to start the fight, but they had a traitor in their midst. He lobbed grenades at the walls separating them from Wards 8 and 9, allowing members of Los Tigrones and Los Lobos to rush in and infiltrate Ward 5. The inmates crawled through holes to get to Los Choneros and then brutally attacked any and all members of the gang they could find. Not content with blowing things up in just one ward, they also crawled through holes to get to Wards 1 and 3 and attacked not only Los Choneros members but also inmates caught in the crossfire. If you're wondering why people were sorted into wards by gangs, it's because Ecuador has mostly lost control of its jails. One inmate says when an inmate enters the prison, it's not the guards who decide where he goes, it's the gangs. Using methods associated with Mexican drug cartels who kill in brutal, horrifying ways to inspire fear, they ran amok through the prison. They killed approximately 35 people during the rampage, injuring 48 others. Police entered the jail to try to regain control but quickly fled when they saw how chaotic and violent the situation was. 6 cooks in the wing where the fight was happening and 2 officers sustained injuries while fleeing. At this point, pretty much all the administrative personnel had disappeared. The prison was lawless, the inmates had taken control, and they were using it to kill each other. And Los Choneros wasn't going to take this attack lying down. On the same afternoon, they launched a counterattack on Los Tigrones and the other rival gang members. All in all, the fighting lasted almost 2 straight days until the morning of September 30th. President Guillermo Lasso sent in 900 officers and army soldiers to force the inmates into submission and gain control of the prison. In the meantime, relatives of the prisoners gathered outside a nearby morgue to see if any of their loved ones had been caught in the crossfire. People like Zenaida Moreira, whose 23-year-old son had been arrested for stealing chairs, clamored for answers. Surviving inmates with roles of responsibility within the prison tried to help police identify the bodies. Some were so badly burned no one could recognize them. In the end, 118 people died in the September 2021 Littoral riots, with some sources estimating over 120 may have been killed. But anything Ecuador prisoners do, Brazilian prisoners can do too. Number 2. Amazon prison riots. Rival gangs in Brazil often fight for control of the regional drug trade. One day, this fight spilled over into the Anísio Jobim prison complex in Manaus, Brazil, the capital of the Amazon. Familia do Norte, FDN, generally controls the drug trafficking inside Amazonian prison complexes that they're embedded in, including Anísio Jobim. However, they were increasingly being challenged by some new up-and-comers, First Capital Command, or PCC, who usually operate out of Sao Paulo, and they weren't about to take that lying down. On January 2, 2017, FDN decided to send a message. Starting with a horrific bang, they killed 6 PCC men and threw their bodies over the perimeter fence. And that was just the beginning. The FDN had been importing arms and ammunition through holes in the prison wall for months. The gang members armed themselves and stormed into the cells with PCC members, killing many and taking others hostage. Where were the guards, you might ask? Well, as usual, the prison was understaffed and overcrowded, with 153 prison guards on staff out of the 250 the prison was supposed to employ, and over 1,100 prisoners, almost triple the prison's capacity. Some were terrified and gave up on trying to control the situation. 12 of them were taken hostage. In fact, FDN took 74 inmates hostage as well, holding them for 17 hours so they could continue to assert their dominance over the prison. They shot and choked men to death, burned their bodies, and littered the prison yard with them. In the meantime, prisoners at a linked prison, the Antonio Trinidad Penal Institute, decided to take advantage of the mayhem going on in the neighboring jail. While authorities were figuring out how to control the gang fight at Anicio Jobim, 72 of the prisoners at Antonio Trinidad escaped. Though 40 were recaptured, the rest were nowhere to be found. Security tried to enter Anicio Jobim, but decided the situation was too unpredictable. Eventually, after the FDN had wiped out rivals and sent a message to other gang competitors, the hostages were freed and authorities were allowed to enter peacefully. Many of those who caused the disturbance were transferred to federal penitentiaries. After 17 hours of fighting and rioting, 56 people lay dead. Amazonas Public Safety Secretary Sergio Fontes said the inmates had established with the administration a promise that everything would run smoothly throughout the holidays and there wouldn't be any problems. They didn't keep their promise, but you can't expect much from criminals, can you? Considering more people were killed in 2 other riots in the next 2 weeks, the answer is no, you probably can't expect much. But what about fights in women's prisons? They can't be as bad, right? Number 1. The Tamara Prison Riot. Prisons in Central America are a whole other world of violence. Gangs control them more often than the guards, and the governments don't seem to be able to get a handle on them. And that doesn't just apply to men's prisons. One of the most horrific and violent prison fights happened in the Women's Center of Social Adaptation in Honduras, often simply referred to as Tamara Prison. As with the other fights, prisoners had been smuggling in guns, explosives, blades, and ammunition for years with little difficulty. Later, Honduran President Xiomara Castro alleged that this was likely happening with the help of the guards working in the prison. The inmates at Tamara lived in fear of one group particularly, the Barrio 18 gang. Barrio 18 is one of the most feared youth gangs in the Western Hemisphere, and a rival to the more well-known MS-13, a rivalry that led to this prison fight in the first place. The groups are known as Maras, gangs that started in the US and had their influence and members spread to Latin America. In Tamara Prison, which houses members of both Barrio 18 and MS-13, tensions had been escalating for weeks in mid-2023. Joana Paulo Soriano Uceda, whose mother and sister were in the prison, said her relatives told her Barrio 18 members were out of control. They were fighting with them all the time. That was the last time we talked. Another civilian said her friend who was in the prison, Alejandra Martinez, had told her right before the fight that the Barrio 18 people had threatened them that they were going to kill them if they didn't turn over a relative. And on June 20th, 2023, some members of the Barrio 18 gang decided to make good on their threats. They loaded up their weapons, 18 pistols, an assault rifle, 2 machine pistols, and at least 2 grenades, and got ready for an all-out assault on the MS-13 members locked in the same prison complex. Soon after, they barged into and took control of Cell Block 1, the home of many MS-13 members. The Barrio 18 gang started shooting inmates they came across and attacking them with machetes. Cells were set alight regardless of who was inside them. It was a relentless and bloody attack. A group of inmates were so desperate that they made a hole in the prison roof. Unfortunately, the plan to escape didn't end up working. They dropped back down into the cell, and Barrio 18 inmates immediately unleashed a barrage of gunfire into their cell. By some miracle, one of the inmates survived. When later recounting her story, she said she looked up and saw the wall right behind her riddled with bullet holes, dead and dying bodies around her. Another prisoner, Wendy, said while seeing her friends and fellow inmates taken down by gunfire all around her, no one helped. So where were the guards? Well, they were most likely helping Barrio 18 move between cells to kill people more efficiently. According to President Castro, at the end of this particular prison riot, the state counted 46 victims. 7 other women were sent for treatment for knife and bullet wounds to a nearby hospital. Not a single guard was injured or seemingly even targeted, which is perhaps why President Castro fired them all after the riot, replacing them with an elite special police unit. Perhaps uncoincidentally, Tamara has experienced no further riots of this scale to date. The officer stares, transfixed by the horrific scene before him. His hand slowly moves to cover his mouth as a wave of nausea hits. He gags once, then twice, barely holding it together. In the dimly lit cell, a naked prisoner lies motionless on the floor. Around him, a gruesome mix of blood, shattered skull fragments, and, horrifyingly, a spoon, lodged in a place no spoon should ever be. In a way, the officer is not surprised. The broken lump of flesh and bones on the floor was once a child predator, a special kind of inmate who regularly suffers the worst fate imaginable in prison. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. It is a real, true story, and perhaps one of the most grisliest incidents ever recorded within prison walls. But before we dive further into this nightmare scenario, let's pull back the curtain on life inside for the predators. No two prisons are alike, and experiences can differ. In the US and in most Western nations, there is an unwritten rule. If you're locked up for preying on children, you are not just unpopular, you are marked. Chomos, chesters, kitty fiddlers, tree jumpers, short eyes, rippers, skinners, rock spiders, and nonces. Whatever name you want to give to a predator, at the very least they will be treated like social pariahs. At worst, well, you'll see what happens soon when prisoners adopt a zero-tolerance policy toward these types of inmates. Let's look at some statistics first. In the United States alone, the sheer scale of incarceration is staggering. Across state prisons, local jails, and federal facilities, nearly 1.9 million people are behind bars in 2024. That's 583 per 100,000, a far higher rate than any other highly developed nation. In case you didn't know, there's a lot of violence in the USA. If we only look at state prisons with just over 1 million inmates, 674,000 of them are in for violent offenses. 168,000 of those people are in for sex offenses. The report doesn't state just how many of them are imprisoned for sex offenses specifically related to young people, but a Johns Hopkins University study in 2021 said there were around 127,000 inmates in the US serving time in state prisons for sex offenses involving children. What this tells us is that US prisons are crawling with sexual predators. The question is, how do this many men hide and avoid a beating? As a former prisoner wrote online, sex offenders, if they're stupid enough to go into a mainline yard, will get got. It almost always is never right away. They might lead the offender to a false sense of security. When you're inducted into a US prison, you have an interview and you'll be asked if there's a reason you can't get placed in the general population. Being a chomo is a hell of a good reason if you don't want to get got, and that's when you can ask to be put in what's called protective custody, or PC. PC is not just a world of like-minded chomos. There's still a lot of dangerous prisoners in there. It's a special part of the prison where you'll also find plenty of snitches and guys who've left street gangs. Now let's take a look at the case of John Gagan, a former Roman Catholic priest who left over 150 boys suffering from decades of trauma. He ended up in Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts. Even though he was in PC, a fellow prisoner named Joseph Lee Druce stomped his face in and strangled him to death. Just like a guy we'll talk about later, Druce was a killer who went to prison and said he would make it his life's work to hunt predators. These were the men who reminded him of the people who abused him when he was a child. Druce later said he was driven to murder when he heard Gagan share stories of his predatory past. Still, a murder in PC is unlikely, since if a prisoner is on parole, they might not want to ruin their chances of getting out. It's more likely a lifer would commit the attack, but there'd be a suspicion if a lifer asked to move to PC. Being attacked is not the only reason why PC isn't a very nice place to be for a convicted chester. You'll likely be spending 22 to 23 hours a day in your cell. You'll get the same commissary rights, but that's about it. Everything else is restricted. If you go out to the yard, it might just be you alone or in a small group, what they call a bullpen. When you shower, it'll be you alone, taken there in chains like an animal. You'll also likely not be able to work, and you can forget about group educational classes. Okay, so what if someone is a predator but they don't like the idea of all of the restrictions in PC? Can they just lie about their crime and fit right into the general population? The answer is no, not likely. When you're the new guy in prison, quite often someone will come into your cell and demand to see your papers. If anywhere on those papers someone sees letters Joe and Mo, you're not going to have a fun time in that prison. It's almost impossible to hide your conviction in prison, and you won't get through your sentence without anyone ever asking about it. Prisoners have a lot of time on their hands, and they'll want to know what kind of man they're dealing with. If you don't have papers, it's quite easy to find out what you've done, since sentencing information is usually available online. Also, prison officers might just let it slip, since people who hurt women and kids aren't exactly high on the popularity list. And let's be honest, some officers just like R-rated drama. You will almost certainly not be able to say, "Oops, I forgot my papers," or "the dog ate them," or "you lost them." Most likely you'll be assigned a public defender, and with their overloaded caseload, you'll be left handling much of your legal work alone. You'll need to keep those papers close, because if anyone demands to see your charges and you refuse, it's like painting a target on your back, practically shouting, "I'm a Chester, please stab me." It all depends on which prison you're in, but any former prisoner will tell you that predators do not always get the crap beat out of them or killed. A prisoner might make it through their sentence, but only if they keep their past buried. No bragging, no slip-ups. It's also quite common to extort them, making them pay their way out of beatings like a chomo tax. Nonetheless, a former British prisoner who did 7 years in an Arizona prison said the gangs adhered to a KOS system, kill on sight, for chomos, another term meaning the offender is fair game for a serious beating and is greenlit. That same guy says guards will often ignore horrific beatings, or at least when they weren't doing the beating themselves. In 2006, Orange County jail officers sat watching cops on TV as a group of inmates beat a software engineer named John Derek Chamberlain to death. The inmates said Chamberlain was a chomo, which wasn't exactly true. Sure, he was guilty of having sketchy content on his computer, but when you're handing out a death sentence, you should probably double-check the finer details. He was murdered over what the courts ruled a misdemeanor. He decided not to divulge his crime, so a shot caller greenlit a beating. 7 men unleashed a savage assault, stomping him relentlessly and violating him with a pencil and a tube of toothpaste. Now they're doing sentences ranging from 15 years to life. They killed a guy for a lie and in the process ruined their own lives. That's prison logic for you. Here's another fine example. In 2020, at the Larry D. Smith Correctional Facility in Banning, California, a man was beaten to death in his cell. The guy who did it had earlier asked his mother to look online to see what the guy had done. The answer? 100% Chester. "Don't get involved in it," she said. "No choice," he replied. This guy was serving time for assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer, a serious crime, but he would have gotten out with plenty of life left to live. Now he will spend the rest of his life in prison, without a chance of parole. Some people will literally lose everything to get at predators. You'll see one of the reasons for this in a minute or two. A way to avoid a deadly confrontation is to get yourself put in administrative segregation, ADSEG, although this does come with a number of downsides, so a lot of predators won't do it. ADSEG drives you up the wall due to the sheer loneliness. As a former long-term ADSEG prisoner once said, "Try locking yourself in a small bathroom and stay in there for half the day. Now imagine how that would feel for 10 years. The intrepid Infographics show writer who wrote this video tried it for a whole hour. Let's just say patience and bravery aren't exactly his strong suit. You're in a tiny cell with no radio and no TV. It's you and 4 bare walls, no windows, no bars on the door to look through, just you and your mind. Maybe a book to read if you're lucky. They don't even allow you to keep your mattress to lie on during the day. You might only get 3 to 4 hours out of your cell in a whole week. When you do get yard time, it's either the bullpen or a fenced-in space underneath a roof. So you might never see the sky or feel a warm breeze blow across your face. Food is delivered to you through a slot in the door. If you go to shower, you turn around and put your hands through the slot to be handcuffed. When you sleep, it's often to the sound of screams. It is quite simply torture. But if you're a targeted chomo and you can't immediately get placed in PC, this might be your only option. Let's say you ignore the warnings and stay in the general population to tough it out. What's the absolute worst that can happen? In the UK, chomo intolerance is just as strict as it is in the US. Yet the most brutal stories we found come from England, the land of good manners, beans on toast, and apparently some shockingly vicious attacks on nonsense. In 2012, a 33-year-old male prisoner in Durham prison was described by a psychiatrist as a remorseless, callous psychopath who harbors cannibalistic urges. He and another prisoner, 24, lured a 23-year-old guy into a cell. This young man had been sentenced in 2011 for predatory actions involving a 13-year-old girl. Once he was in the cell, the two men proceeded to hold him down and, amongst other things, slice him up with a razor blade. They took a pen and pushed it into one of his eyeballs. Once he was dead, they disemboweled him. When asked later why they chose this particular man when they had scores of other predators to choose from, one of them said they just fancied doing it. As is often the case with extreme prison violence, the perpetrators are not usually heroes intent to clean up society, but maniacs who just want an excuse to keep hurting people. The older guy in this attack was serving 24 years for sneaking through a window in a nursing home for vulnerable women. He attacked two of the women, one in her 50s and one in her 70s, who were sharing a room. He suffocated one and brutally assaulted the other. This was certainly no hero with a profound sense of ethics. Many of the men who hurt predators in prison are doing it because someone hurt them when they were young. Statistics show us that the rates of childhood abuse, both physical and sexual, are higher among prisoners than on the outside. This brings us to Robert Maudsley, a man often called Britain's scariest prisoner. In 1974, he murdered a man who'd shown him photos of children he'd hurt, and he was sent to the infamous psychiatric hospital Broadmoor. In 1977, he tortured a fellow patient for 9 hours, intermittently sticking the man's bloodied head to the window to show the staff what he was doing. This victim, like Motley's first victim, had hurt children. When the staff finally opened the door, an officer said the victim's head had been, quote, cracked open like a boiled egg. A spoon had been pushed through the man's ear and deep into his head. The rumor soon spread that Maudsley had eaten the man's brain, which wasn't true, but the tabloids went ahead and nicknamed him the Cannibal and the Brain Eater. Too dangerous for the hospital, Maudsley was sent to Wakefield Prison, aka Monster Mansion, a place infamous for sexual predators. Suffice it to say, given his reputation as a cannibal, he didn't get so much grief from the other prisoners. In 1978, he took his French teacher, a convicted predator, to his cell, where he strangled him and stabbed him to death. Maudsley hid the body under his bed. He then called out to the landing and asked if anyone wanted to join him in his cell. Unsurprisingly, no one took him up on the offer, so he went hunting. He planned to murder 7 men, all predators. You probably already guessed Maudsley himself was an abused child. This was revenge. He walked into a guy's cell, locked the door, and proceeded to hack at him with a knife. Unable to convince anyone to come have a chat with him, he calmly walked down the hallway as prisoners parted like the Red Sea. He then went to the staff office and informed the guards that they should expect 2 fewer men at roll call that night. Too dangerous even for prison, he was later moved to the basement where he's still rotting away to this day, in a specially made transparent Perspex cage. The authorities have refused his request for a bird as a companion. The rules state not even the officers can speak to him. He once wrote in a letter, "I am left to stagnate, vegetate, and to regress, left to confront my solitary head-on with people who have eyes but don't see, and who have ears but don't hear, who have mouths but don't speak." He's requested cyanide, but the British authorities are too kind to let him die. He's described as gentle and kind with a genius-level IQ. He loves classical music, poetry, and art. So now you know where the idea of Hannibal Lecter comes from. He blames his parents for the murders he committed, once saying, "When I kill, I think I have my parents in mind. If I had killed my parents in 1970, none of these people need have died." So, if a predator ever finds himself in prison, he should know there are Robert Maudsleys around who can't wait to meet them. You're locked up in one of the worst prisons on Earth. Miserable doesn't even begin to describe it. You want to lie down and forget this nightmare, but there's no space. It's so crowded you can't even sit. You're shoulder to shoulder with other inmates. This has to be illegal, right? Good luck filing a complaint. There's no warden here who cares, and definitely no manager you could speak to. The most disturbing thing, this isn't the worst prison you're going to encounter on this episode of the Infographics Show. Prisons that are worse than death. Number 10. As a visitor to Mumbai, you probably shouldn't have shoplifted, but you kind of figured that you would just be given a ticket and let go. But from the looks on the faces of the guards as they haul you into the prison transport van, that doesn't seem likely. You are headed, along with just about all the ne'er-do-wells in the city, to Mumbai Central Prison, also known as Arthur Road Jail. This is the most famous prison in India, as well as the most notorious. Built in 1926 and dating back to the British colonist era, it is a massive 2-acre complex. And in many ways it feels like it hasn't changed since it was built. Crowded into a heavily developed area of Mumbai, it's located by 3 different rail stations and plenty of housing. Mumbai is one of the most population-dense cities in the world, and the jail mirrors this. It's one of the most overcrowded jails in the world. Originally built to hold 800 inmates, it currently holds close to 2,900. While it had some new barracks added to alleviate the crowding a little, the place still has a massive combination of overcrowding and violence, all in a chaotic setting. And you're about to be thrown right into the middle of it. You can hear shouting and threats being hurled as you're taken in through the door, but they're probably not toward you. The prison is infamous for being a hub of gang violence, and clashes are extremely common. In 2006, a brawl between gangs ruled by two feared criminals broke out, and the prison eventually responded by housing rival gang members separately. While things may have calmed down slightly, the crowding in the prison means the guards can't really keep everything under control. So who is housed here? How about everyone? Mumbai Central Jail houses just about every major accused criminal in the city, which means petty thieves like you will be housed alongside gangsters and even far worse criminals. In 2010, Mustafa Dosa, the mastermind behind a series of terror blasts in the city, clashed with a gangster and led to one of them being wounded with a sharpened spoon. The violence has continued, with the overstuffed jail regularly overwhelming its understaffed guards. So you can guess that this isn't gonna be the Ritz. And you have no idea how right you are. You're only gonna be here until you see a judge and pay a fine, which means your only real job is to keep your head down and survive. But that won't be easy. You're shoved into an overcrowded cell, the floors are dirty, the water tastes funny, and half of the inmates are coughing. The meals are regular, but very small and not particularly filling. You notice some of the inmates slipping money to the guards, which is probably how they manage to avoid some of the worst of this place. Your court date can't come soon enough. They say hell is other people, but it can also be isolation. Number 9. You are one of the worst, and everyone knows it. There's not a prison around that can hold you, and not a prisoner or a guard that isn't afraid of you. So you're not surprised that you've been transferred again. It's pretty much a regular event for you. But as your transport rolls down the roads of Fremont County, Colorado, you start to get a sinking feeling in your stomach. Because you're not heading to any ordinary prison, you're heading to ADX Florence, the most infamous Supermax prison in the United States. And once you go in here, you are not coming out. ADX Florence is a federal prison known as the end of the line. The vast majority of inmates here aren't getting out. Most are serving life sentences or waiting to die on death row. It houses some of the most high-profile and infamous inmates in the United States, including mass shooters, terrorists, and drug kingpins. You're almost honored to be among those numbers, but you know it's going to come with a lot of negatives. In your old prison, you were the terror of the yard, and every inmate who came across you knew to give you your due. But that won't be the case here because you won't be seeing the outside world much at all. The main thing to know about ADX Florence is that its security measures are amongst the tightest in the country. The criminals housed here have either proven themselves a security risk at their old prisons or are dangerous enough to be sent directly here. They spend up to 23 hours a day in their cells, being let out only for brief supervised exercise for less than an hour a day. But if you're excited to meet some of your fellow killers in this exercise hour, don't get your hopes up, because you might be here for years and never interact with another inmate. You'll get out of your cell for a short period each day, but exercise typically consists of being in an individual outside cage, supervised by 2 guards. You might see another inmate in the distance and you can guess what they're in for, but just about everything else, including meals, will be done in your cell. And any attempt at escaping or resistance will be met with harsh treatment from armed guards, because as bad as this place is, it can definitely get worse. And you don't want to find out what the punishment cells are like. ADX Florence might actually be one of the less violent federal prisons out there because the inmates have no opportunity for violence, but that doesn't make it any less of a hellish place to be. Here, every day is the same. You won't see anyone besides your jailers. It's easy for time to slip away here and for people to lose their last bits of hope and resistance. And that may be exactly how the jailers want it, because the worst of the worst are a lot easier to contain when they don't have any hope for release. It's enough to make you wish for chaos, but be careful what you wish for. Number 8. Traveling to Colombia is a dicey thing in the best of times. The country remains in an ongoing state of tension due to a cold civil war between left-wing rebels and right-wing government supporters. A left-wing current government hasn't changed that dynamic much, and both sides have been responsible for terrible crimes. And when they get caught, they go to one place, La Modelo, the largest prison in Bogota, housing 11,000 inmates, and that's where you're going, as a guard. But as you're given orientation, you think you might have bitten off more than you can chew, because this isn't a prison, so much as a war zone. La Modelo has one of the strangest setups of any prison you've ever seen. It's not really one prison, it's two. The north wing of the prison contains left-wing rebels, while the paramilitary forces of the right wing are housed in the south wing. Both groups are violent, ready for conflict, and housed in numbers that could easily overwhelm the guards. So naturally, the guards don't carry weapons. Now that might seem counterintuitive, but the fear is that the inmates could seize the weapons and become a bigger threat. So the only guns are found in the watchtowers. But that doesn't make you feel any better about entering those doors. The strangest thing about the prison is that the interiors of each wing are largely self-sustaining. As they're ideologically uniform, the inmates run the prisons and even used to run businesses like restaurants inside. More menacingly, they conduct their own military training exercises and have access to weapons through smuggling. It almost sounds peaceful, but there is one big exception to this, because there's an area between those two wings, and it's a no man's land. La Modelo has been home to some of the most infamous violence in Colombia's history, particularly in 2000. A peace pact between the two sides was broken when the corpse of a paramilitary leader was found. While the authorities were investigating, a conflict broke out between the two sides. The result was a 12-hour battle, an extended lockdown, and over 100 killed. This was what led to the National Police of Colombia finally entering the prison and trying to impose order. And that order is what you're here to ensure. Today, the severely overcrowded and unsanitary conditions in the prison are well known, and both sides are still largely allowed to control their territory as long as they don't attack the guards. But the guards can be a problem as well, with many being corrupt and making deals with one gang leader or even both. And you know that at any time, the neutral territory between the prisons could once again explode into a violent gang war, with you right in the middle. But hey, it's better than being a political prisoner, right? Number 7. Turkey is not a place to mess around. Under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the country has leaned hard into authoritarianism, and he has doubled down on it after a coup attempt. And those who cross him are likely to wind up in Diyarbakir prison, a large cell block housing around 700 inmates, at least on paper. Really, it's usually overcrowded and packed with as many political prisoners as the Turkish police have rounded up lately. You're not sure what you've done to wind up here, but you're sure you'll find out. Because at Diyarbakir prison, the cell is just the start of the punishment. The prison was first established in 1980 and transferred to federal authority after a coup attempt. But it's not just any prisoner you'll encounter here. Just about every inmate here is accused of political crimes, and that means the government has a special interest in them. In many countries, the overcrowding is just the result of the country's conditions, but here the lack of sanitation and medical care is potentially deliberate, seeking to break the inmates and get them to confess. But if that doesn't work, the prison has other ways. The prison is known for being one of the worst human rights violators around, using torture and beatings extensively in interrogations. Inmates who have survived report being beaten, stripped naked, blindfolded, and sprayed with a hose. Prisoners have been dragged by their hair and even threatened by dogs. Humiliation is also a key part of the abuse here, with inmates being forced to salute the guards' dogs. Other more extreme tortures were reported, like hanging by the arms, in a scene straight out of a medieval dungeon, or electric shocks. And naturally, some of that goes very wrong. Diyarbakir prison has a long history of incidents resulting in the death of inmates, most famously a 1996 event where guards stormed the prison and killed 10 inmates, wounding 46 others. The prison insisted that the guards were justified, but the investigation went all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. The court found that there was no evidence that the level of violence amongst the prisoners justified the overwhelmingly violent response. In total, dozens of inmates have died here over the years. And the most terrifying thing about this prison is you don't know how to get out. Political prisons play by different rules than others, with the accused having fewer rights to due process. You're accused by the state. They know what you're guilty of, but you might not. And even if you confess, things might just get worse. The prison is particularly notorious for its treatment of the Kurdish minority in Turkey, which has been agitating for independence for decades. And as Erdogan steps up his oppression of dissident groups in the country, it's likely this prison will only get worse. And there is no political prison more infamous than this next one. Number 6. You were picked up on the battlefield. You didn't know or care about the larger implications of the battle against the United States. As a young Afghani man, your duty was to defend the homeland. But now you're in the custody of your hated enemy, and you're in transport to the place where they hold the highest security prisoners of war and suspected terrorists. But you're not going to the US mainland. You're going to Guantanamo Bay,
the US's prison on the coast of Cuba, and you won't be leaving for a very long time. Guantanamo Bay is one of the strangest prisons in the world. Not only is it a US prison located in a foreign country, but it's located in an enemy country. The US has had frosty at best relations with Cuba since the communist takeover in the 1960s and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The US actually attempted to invade Cuba, but the mission failed and left them with only a tiny slice of the island, where they built the prison and then never let go. And today, it's nearly empty, but for a long time it was the most feared location under US control, because it exists outside of the US judicial system. Everyone in Guantanamo Bay is a suspected terrorist or associate of enemy armies. This includes some of the most infamous terrorists in American history, including al-Qaeda ringleader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who played a key role in planning the 9/11 terror attacks. But at its peak, it also held hundreds of lower-level al-Qaeda associates, Taliban, and Iraqi soldiers, and plenty of people who claimed to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they all wanted their day in court. But for some of them, that day would never come. Under a military order in November 2001, the government began detaining these foreign nationals indefinitely, and at its peak in 2003, the prison held over 680 inmates. While the prison was run by the US military and didn't use torture as a policy, there were plenty of reports of interrogations that got out of control, with detainees being waterboarded and beaten, and their pleas for release fell on deaf ears. The Obama administration initially wanted to charge Mohammed in civilian court in New York, but those plans went nowhere, and for some, the limbo still drags on. Over the years, the prison was heavily depopulated, with most of the detainees, who have been there for over a decade in some cases, being released back to foreign countries that were willing to take them. 9 inmates had died in custody over the years, and 15 still remain in Guantanamo Bay, most of them the highest priority detainees who have little to no chance of ever seeing the light of day again. And for now, the fortress on the southeastern tip of Cuba maintains its menacing presence. And sometimes, it takes only one event to turn a prison into a nightmare. Number 5. Welcome to Rwanda, where the prisons were always intense. Many of the jails in this war-torn African nation were built in the early 20th century, and inmates faced outdated conditions, small cells, and high heat in the summer. And in the city of Kigali, one of the most infamous prisons is Gikondo. This jail played its part in the city for decades, containing everything from petty thieves to murderers. Designed to house only a few thousand inmates, the prison has struggled to contain the sheer volume of people pushed through its gates over the years. And then came the biggest crime in Rwanda's history. You're not going into this prison at normal times, because there haven't been normal times in Rwanda since the 1990s. That's when the Rwandan genocide took place, as the dominant Hutus carried out a campaign of mass killing against the Tutsis. The best estimates are that as many as 800,000 people died, although some sources claim up to 1 million. And in the aftermath, there were many calls for justice. In the end, tens of thousands of Hutu militia ringleaders were convicted of crimes and sentenced to extensive prison time. And they had to go somewhere. If you're heading to Kigali's Gikondo prison now, you're in for a bad time, because the prison that once held several thousand people had to be expanded to hold as many as 50,000, many of them guilty of genocide. This makes it one of the most overcrowded prisons anywhere in the world, as the cells can have dozens of people in them. This makes it impossible to get a good night's sleep, as there often isn't room for everyone to lie down. This means that many people may be forced to try to sleep leaning or even standing, and it only gets worse from there. Gikondo and a similar prison, Muhanga, are also known as some of the most unsanitary prisons in the world. There are no bathrooms in the cells, so prisoners are required to use often disgusting communal latrines. This has led disease to spread like wildfire in the prison, with skin infections and respiratory ailments being among the most common plagues. And if someone needs more serious medical attention, good luck. The prisons are massively understaffed. So it's no surprise that tensions are running high. An overcrowded prison is a powder keg to begin with. Now imagine an overcrowded prison where everyone knows that your fellow inmate might be responsible for the worst atrocities in your country's history, with the majority of inmates being guilty of genocide-related crimes. There's a sense of suspicion and hatred that filters through the prison. All of this has led to the prison getting a lot of notoriety, so much that the International Red Cross has been advocating for reform. But as of 2020, the prison continued to fill up, reportedly with plenty of petty criminals being shoved in there with the war criminals. But there might be one country that prisoners fear more than any other. Number 4. Being arrested in Russia is a terrifying prospect. The dictatorship is known for its harsh treatment of foreign civilians, particularly Americans, hoping to exchange them for Russian prisoners with serious crimes on their ledger. In the past, celebrities have been arrested for minor drug offenses, and journalists have been arrested on espionage charges considered to be trumped up by many, and Russian police are known for frame-ups. But no matter the cause, the odds are anyone arrested in Moscow is heading to the same place, Butyrka Prison, a facility dating back to the 17th century. And it's your first stop on a journey into hell. Butyrka Prison is a pre-trial detention facility primarily, but that doesn't mean it's likely to be an easier destination. The prison holds just about every kind of inmate you could imagine, and protective custody is the furthest thing from anyone's mind. That means someone arrested for minor drug offenses could be sharing a cell with a notorious gangster or a violent criminal. And forget about any privacy. The cells are massively overcrowded, with reports of cells built for 10 people holding as many as 100 people. And with overcrowding comes health risks of the worst kind. Like all overcrowded prisons, the facility is known for being a petri dish of diseases, including tuberculosis, which can be deadly if not treated properly. Making it worse, medical treatments for inmates are limited and hard to come by. The place is reportedly infested with rats and insects, and it's common to have inmates die there, including high-profile ones. Attorney Sergei Magnitsky died there in 2009 while being held without trial after exposing Russian corruption. And the thing people might need to fear the most in here is the guards. There are ample records of beatings and torture by guards, which is widespread in the Russian prison system. This is commonly just abuse by power-tripping screws. But remember, many people here are still awaiting trial, which means Russia has a vested interest in getting them to confess. And that means this might just be your first stop in the Russian prison system, but it could be your last, as the Russian government has an extremely high conviction rate, and they'll get those confessions by any means necessary. But if you survive this prison, what comes next might be much worse. Number 3. Once you're convicted in Russia, your situation is going to change a lot. Many people who are convicted are sent to labor camps, heavily modeled on the gulags pioneered by Stalin. But for high-profile inmates and the most dangerous, they're headed about as far away as they can get. They're headed to the Black Dolphin prison, near the border with Kazakhstan, a remote fortress saved for the worst of the worst, or those Russia truly wants to make an example of. And those who have experienced it have described it as a true no man's land. Serial killers, spies, and enemies of the state are brought to the closest thing Russia has to a true Supermax prison, spending almost their entire day in total isolation. And even when they're removed from their cells, they don't get to enjoy the outside. One of the most dehumanizing parts of the experience here is the fact that inmates are blindfolded when they're moved. This is so the inmates can't get the layout of the prison into their heads, and they know very little of the sprawling complex should they try an escape attempt. But even if they did escape, that's not likely to last for long. One of the most effective ways to prevent prisoner escapes is location, and building your prison in a massive desert hundreds of miles from a major city certainly takes care of those opportunities. The prison is known for being one of the harshest in the Russian system, as its inmates are not going anywhere. There are few, if any, rehabilitative programs here. The inmates are forced to keep an extremely strict daily schedule that gives them little time for planning or doing anything that might make trouble. And if anyone steps a toe out of line, the guards are waiting. Torture isn't just common at Black Dolphin Prison, it's a way of life. For those who've experienced the prison firsthand and lived to tell about it, they have terrifying tales. The only time they're out of their cells are for 90 minutes of exercise in a cage while their cells are searched. When in their cells for the rest of the time, they are forbidden from sitting or lying on their bunks and are constantly tested through surveillance to ensure they're paying attention. The only meal available is soup, which is served 4 times a day, and humiliation is a way of life. One of the most signature elements of the Black Dolphin prison is how the inmates are escorted. Not only are they blindfolded, they are bent over at the waist while the officer leads them by handcuffed hands. Not only can't the prisoners see, they are totally dependent on the guard, and reports of conditions here are few and far between, because no one leaves Black Dolphin prison. Every single person here is serving life imprisonment, and in Russia, parole isn't happening. Number 2. In the early 2000s, El Salvador was rife with crime and gang activity. This led to the rise of eccentric right-wing President Nayib Bukele, who gained popularity by vowing a crackdown on crime. As part of it, he built a massive new prison in the country, CCOT, a huge facility designed to hold up to 40,000 inmates. The vast majority of residents are gang members, with many of them being held for extended terms without trial and being forced to do hard labor. The population was largely made up of local criminals until recently, because CCOT might have just become the most well-known prison in the world. When the new U.S. administration took office in January 2025, it vowed to crack down on undocumented immigrants in the U.S., especially those in gangs. But that would require a massive increase in U.S. prison capacity, which they didn't have. So the two leaders of the U.S. and El Salvador came up with an unconventional solution. They would just send the arrested people, many of them Venezuelans, to El Salvador instead. This was done without trial and condemned as human trafficking. But the battle over legality wears on in the courts. But for those who were ferried to CCOT, they found themselves in a harsh new world. The massive prison is made up of huge cells designed to hold up to 156 inmates and contain hard metal bunks and only 2 toilets. The cells are lit 24 hours a day, making sleep very hard to come by, and the only entertainment provided is a pair of Bibles. For any inmate who steps out of line, solitary confinement awaits. Pitch-black cells with only a small hole in the ceiling and a concrete bed. Terms of up to 15 days in solitary are common for troublemakers, and there are plenty of troublemakers. The prison is mostly filled with gang members, but the guards may be the ones to fear the most. CCOT has been referred to as a black hole of human rights for many reasons. The inmates are overcrowded and the prison is badly managed. How do you keep tabs on 156 prisoners in a single cell? That means the gang members often torment the non-violent inmates. The prison is also one of the most secure in the world from the outside, which means standard amenities like outside recreation and family visits simply aren't a thing here. And this is made worse by the fact that very few of the inmates in CCOT are even convicted criminals. But the architects aren't slowing down at all. Many see CCOT as a new model to follow. The mega prison might be hell on earth for those inside, but crime has dropped massively in El Salvador since it was opened. President Bukele has pushed back hard against condemnations, even boasting that he'll be opening a new prison for white-collar criminals based on the same model. And the U.S. has announced that it wants to start shipping convicted U.S. citizens to CCOT. After all, they have the space. But all these prisons have one thing in common that this next one doesn't. You don't actually have to be sent there. Number 1. You wake up. You praise the leader. You work some more. You get a little food, just enough to stay alive. You get whatever sleep you can. The next day will be more of the same, just like every day before it. You're a prisoner of Kaechon Internment Camp, the most brutal prison camp in North Korea, better known as Camp 14. It's the most feared destination for criminals and enemies of the state in the Hermit Kingdom. But for you, it's all you've ever known, because you were born here, and many of the inmates locked up inside are condemned from the moment of their birth. North Korea practices a form of generational slave labor for political prisoners, where those who cross the Kim family are sentenced to life imprisonment in a labor camp, and so are their descendants. Under Juche, those who engage in anti-government activities are considered unredeemable, and so are their entire families, and any family member who is born after. It doesn't take much to get sent here. Criticizing the government can do it, and so can failing badly enough at your job. And while you're here, you better find a way to excel. Everyone in the camp has a job as soon as they're able, with most working in the factories creating textiles and ceramics. This is a hard, back-breaking job, but it might be the better alternative to the other duty of working in the coal mines. While schools do exist within the camp, work duty starts for children as young as 11, meaning that these kids rarely see their parents. The regular work shift in the camp is from 5:30 a.m. to midnight. It's a monotonous, hard existence with no escape, and even surviving day-to-day is difficult. The nutrition situation in the camp is one of the worst in the world. Inmates are fed little more than salted cabbage and corn. This results in all prisoners being starved and losing their teeth due to malnutrition. Desperate for protein, many prisoners resort to scrounging for rats, snakes, and insects. Not only does this make them vulnerable to food poisoning and deadly diseases, but it's illegal. Inmates must gain permission from the guards to eat anything but the standard prison meal, and any violation can have extremely harsh consequences. And death lies around every corner. There are only a few witnesses from this terrifying prison camp. Sin Dong-hyuk, an escapee from the prison who wrote a biography about his experiences, he reported being tortured and witnessing executions, although some elements of his story were later called into question. Kim Yong spent 13 years at the camp and claimed to have seen numerous executions. All the other prisons seem intended to contain prisoners, while this one is designed to work them to death. if it doesn't kill them another way first.
El Chapo is currently holed up in Colorado, but he's not exactly enjoying the mountain views. He's locked away at USP Florence Ad Max, the most secure prison in the world, also known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, or better yet, Supermax. This place isn't just a prison, it's a fortress designed to break even the most dangerous criminals. Inmates spend most of their day in solitary confinement, with tiny soundproofed cells that make sure they barely see or hear another human being. And on today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're going to reveal what El Chapo's life in prison is actually like. In 2019, Joaquin Guzman, also known as El Chapo, was sentenced to life in prison for his many crimes as the former head of the Sinaloa drug cartel in Mexico. These crimes included conducting a continuing criminal enterprise, large-scale narcotics violations, drug trafficking conspiracies, murder conspiracies, money laundering conspiracies, and unlawful use of a firearm, which is kind of anticlimactic. And that's why today El Chapo is locked away in the same infamous prison that once housed criminals like Ted Kaczynski. Not that many people feel sorry for him. After all, he once told investigators he personally killed between 2,000 and 3,000 people, the population of a small town. And that's not even counting the countless lives lost to the cartel that he ran, or the devastation caused by the drugs he trafficked. But now that we have the basics, let's walk through a day in El Chapo's life at ADX Florence. 6 to 7 a.m. Guzman wakes up in the morning after a rough night's sleep. As with most prisoners in the Supermax facility, bad sleep quality is a problem. That's partly because his bed is made of cement, one of the least comfortable materials on Earth. There's a thin mat, but no real mattress, just enough padding to keep him from sleeping directly on cold, hard concrete. And if that wasn't bad enough, 3 steel posts rise from the bed's edges, reaching just above the mat. If the guards decide he's a problem, or if they're just having a bad day, they could strap him down at the wrists, legs, and even his head. No plopping into bed for Guzman unless he wants to crack his head on solid steel. He opens his eyes to look around at the 7 by 12 foot reinforced concrete cell that he's trapped in. To put that in perspective, it's about half the size of an average North American parking space, or if you prefer a cozier comparison, almost twice the size of a king-size bed. But that's it. His living quarters are less than your average Walmart parking spot. The reinforced concrete is meant to prevent escape attempts, which is good considering El Chapo has already escaped from prison twice. In 2001, it was via a laundry cart he hid himself in. His second successful escape attempt in 2015 involved him making his way out through an elaborate tunnel. We'll get back to that one later, as it's influenced his current prison privileges. Neither of those escapes are likely to happen again given El Chapo's current living conditions. The former cartel boss, like other prison inmates, now spends 23 hours in his soundproof and tamper-proof cell. Guzman walks over to his stainless steel sink, which also happens to be his toilet and water fountain. An appetizing mix. Most people start their morning by washing up, brushing their teeth, and freshening up for the day. But in Supermax, water is strictly controlled. Every drop is rationed. His sink, his shower, and his toilet are all on timers. And forget about a tap. There isn't one. It could potentially be broken off and used as a weapon. So Guzman brushes his teeth and washes his face as quickly as he can. Then he goes back to his bed to wait for his meal. 7 to 8 a.m. In most prisons, inmates go down to the mess hall for food, but in a Supermax, wardens want to prevent inmates from socializing, leaving their cells, or posing any danger to the guards as much as possible. So here, Guzman gets room service. A guard slips a food tray through a small slot in the metal cell door. Guzman grabs it and he looks over the day's offerings. Stale bran flakes, an apple, and a cup of oatmeal, with a texture so thick he could probably use it to add some padding to his concrete bed. At least there is one luxury: 2 cartons of milk. One of the only ways that prisoners in Supermax prisons can protest their conditions is via hunger strikes, which happen relatively often. But in this case, a hunger strike might be a better option, as according to his former prisoners, the quality of this food feels like it's part of their punishment. He gulps it all down and passes the tray back through the slot to the guard. The guard inspects the tray to make sure Guzman didn't break off a piece to use in a potential escape, and then he leaves. 8 to 9 a.m. Suddenly, one of the rarest events Guzman can experience in his prison cell occurs. A small shaft of sunlight hits the wall opposite the window. The sun must be at exactly the right angle today. Part of the inmate's punishment at Colorado's Supermax facility is being completely deprived of sky and sunlight. To pay for their crimes, inmates basically get zero access to the outdoors. The window in Guzman's prison cell is small, and when we say small, we mean it is tiny. And it's designed in a way that prisoners can't actually see the landscape around them. They only get a tiny glimpse of the prison roof and a sliver of the sky if they're lucky. Part of the reason for this construction is to stop El Chapo and every other prisoner from being able to understand exactly where their cell is in relation to the prison layout. This is meant to prevent coordination with the outside world in order to organize escape attempts. In case any prisoner starts to get an inkling of where in the prison they're located, some extra security measures help deter them, namely that no prisoner stays in one cell for too long. But we'll get to that soon. In the meantime, Guzman shuffles off to the one place in his cell where he can almost feel the sunlight, and he just enjoys that for the time being. We never said life in a Supermax prison was particularly exciting. 9 to 10 a.m. Now it's back to one of El Chapo's favorite pastimes in prison. Is it frantically doing push-ups, planning revenge on his enemies? Nope, it is letter writing. Guzman writes lots and lots and lots of letters from prison, several hundred of them at this point. Most of them are in Spanish, since his English isn't great, and a lot are addressed to his lawyer or the judge who oversaw his case. Guzman sits at the concrete desk and chair in his cell, and he gets out a pen to write. All of the concrete in-room furniture is secured to the ground, so he can't use it to aid in an escape or in attacks against the guards. And the pen Guzman is working with isn't all that normal either. To prevent prisoners from harming themselves, the Supermax controls what items they have access to. While most people think this just includes the obvious weapons, knives, ropes, and guns, the list is actually pretty extensive. And that's because after years of staring at nothing but concrete, prisoners tend to get pretty desperate and pretty creative when it comes to finding a way out. So the pen Guzman writes with is about the size of a crayon, made of rubber, and unfortunately for him, just a little floppy. Not exactly great for writing, but there's a reason for it. Hardwood and metal pens can be turned into weapons, dangerous to both guards and inmates. And in Supermax, they're not taking the risk. Guzman sets about writing his latest complaint about the lack of visitation rights for his wife, Emma Coronel, and daughters. His 2 daughters are studying in Mexico, so any visit would require a bit of travel and coordination. In 2021, Guzman's wife was also sentenced for drug trafficking. Who doesn't love a family business? Since her release in 2023, the judge has been reluctant to let Emma visit Guzman, mainly as she was one of the people who helped El Chapo escape prison the last time. 10 to 11 a.m. Guzman sits back on his bed to do one of the only other things he can: watch TV. It's a 13-inch screen, and the only programming allowed is educational, religious, and some recreational content. One report says that some Netflix movies and DVDs are also available as long as they're rated PG. So El Chapo probably can't watch El Chapo in his cell, which is a real shame. He's more likely to find the prison recreation department's channel playing yoga and step aerobic tutorials. But it is better than staring at concrete, marginally. 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. The guards show up outside of his cell. Must be an exercise day. They slowly unlock the heavy reinforced metal door and order Guzman to step up to the bars. It's standard procedure. First a full frisk, then the shackles. Only when he's fully restrained will they escort him from the cell. Reports vary on exactly where Guzman gets to exercise. Some prisoners use an exercise pit. There might even be more than one. But when we called the warden to confirm, we were told to mind our own business. El Chapo probably doesn't get to visit the semi-outdoor cage. Instead, he gets about 1 hour per week to exercise, likely in an indoor cell. He's never alone, always escorted there by 2 to 3 guards. And even then, he stays shackled the entire time. So yeah, we're guessing burpees aren't really on the workout plan. Maybe if he behaves himself, Guzman could earn access to a semi-outdoor cage. But even then, it's not exactly a breath of fresh air. It's still mostly enclosed, shielding him from elements and sunlight, so don't expect a scenic jog. Prisoners in Supermax pace around a tiny concrete courtyard, boxed in by barbed wire, while armed guards watch from the towers, ready to take a shot if needed. Not exactly the best spot for a relaxing morning Pilates session. And then, as suddenly as one of the only hours outside of his cell began, it ends. The guards escort Guzman back. He shuffles shackled up down the hall toward his cell. 12 to 1 p.m. Lunchtime. Not exactly that Guzman actually worked up a sweat or anything, but it's still good to get another meal. Well, actually, considering in 2018 the Supermax was spending $3.50 for each inmate's meals per day, maybe it's not that good. And as the lunchtime tray is slipped through the door, he realizes it is as disappointing as usual. A small hamburger, unsalted potato wedges, fruit that may have expired some point last year, and ketchup. The potatoes are cold, the burger's so hot he can't touch it for 20 minutes. Everything is completely unseasoned except for only one spot on the patty that apparently had an entire salt shaker dumped on it. This Supermax must cause weight loss. 1 to 2 p.m. Guzman bangs on the bars and the walls to get a guard's attention. He knows the cell is soundproof, but he figures he'll try anyway. There's not much else to do. He's supposed to get at least 2 15-minute phone calls per month, ones he'd love to use not only to catch up with loved ones, but to confer with the lawyer filing his appeal. However, as Guzman recently complained in one of his many letters to the judge overseeing his case, he's been in the Supermax for a year and have only been authorized 9 telephone calls to my attorney. Realizing once again that no one can hear him banging, he sits down to write another angry letter. about how life in Supermax sucks. 2 to 3 p.m. Wow, today is really full of activities for El Chapo compared to a regular day in this prison cell. It's moving day. As we mentioned, the Supermax constantly keeps prisoners unaware of their location and their surroundings as one of its top priorities. To this end, prisoners get moved every 3 months from one cell to another. If they ever get an inkling of where in the Supermax facility they might be, they immediately get thrown off again. And if you think that the move itself creates a possible opening for the prisoners to escape, think again. Once again, the guards frisk El Chapo and shackle him so they can take him through the hallways. And there is no ordinary hallways. These hallways have 1,400 different remote-controlled steel doors. If there's ever an escape attempt, a violent outburst, or any other emergency, the response is instant. With one press of a button in the control room, the entire prison locks down, every door sealed, every movement stopped, until the issue is identified and order is restored. Slowly, El Chapo makes his way through the halls with the guards close by his side. Everything looks the same. Nothing gives him a clue as to where he was or where he might be going until eventually he gets to a door that looks just like his old door, and he walks in with his handful of belongings and he waits to see what he'll find. 3 to 4 p.m. Part of the reason Guzman is anxious about his new cell is because some of them hold unpleasant surprises. It's not uncommon to walk into a new room and find the walls smeared with feces. And as you might imagine, some prisoners that have been in the Supermax for years mentally fall apart. Some had, well, let's say, issues to begin with. Guzman walks in and thankfully he sees no feces on these walls. That's a good day. He looks at the same 4-inch window, the same concrete bed, and gets ready to settle into the exact same routine as usual. 4 to 5 p.m. There's one trick prisoners can use in the Supermax to communicate with each other, and El Chapo figures now's the time to check who his neighbor is and hope it's someone he can occasionally chat with. Lots of notorious criminals are locked up in the Supermax. The shoe bomber, the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber. There's probably non-bombers there as well, we assume. Maybe he'll end up speaking with one of them. To attempt to communicate, El Chapo takes a toilet paper roll and he holds it over either the sink or the shower drain. He'll try both to see which works. He blows through the roll as hard as he can to clear the pipes of any water they might have in them, creating as open a communication channel as one can get at the Supermax. Then, continuing to hold the roll over the drain, he talks into it. Hola, hablas español? After a while, a response comes back. Hello, no, but I can talk. Since El Chapo's English isn't the best, he exchanges a few words with, well, whoever it is, holding on to those precious few moments of human connection. 5 to 6 p.m. It's time for some light reading. Prisoners are allowed to ask for books out of the prison library, always subject to good behavior, of course, and they can read them in their cell. Once again, the language barrier makes reading a little difficult for El Chapo, but he manages to muddle through. There is one light in his cell that's controlled by the guards. Without it, it's pretty dark in his room, no matter what time of day it is. With it, Guzman has enough light to make out the words on the page and read. He sits on his bed with his latest book and he passes the time. This is a huge change of pace from his first prison experience in Punta Grande. There, he managed to run his whole drug empire from inside of the prison. Perhaps one of the many reasons he's not allowed to make frequent phone calls now. There would be parties, yes, parties all the time. With a long sigh, Guzman sits back and wonders why he ever tried to escape his first prison, where he was having as close to the time of his life as he can have behind bars. 6 to 7 p.m. The last meal of the day slides underneath El Chapo's prison door, signaling that soon it'll be time for bed. Tonight's delicacy is meatloaf. Not that any particular flavor of meat can be identified. A scoop of potato, the most flavorless gravy known to man, and 2 pieces of bread. Even though the meal is anything but appetizing, eating at least gives Guzman something to do for the next hour. Slowly, he chews on his meal. The meatloaf in particular requires a lot of chewing, and he wonders how many days he's been in the Supermax at this point. Time seems to blend together when you're having no fun at all. 7 to 8 p.m. Guzman decides to take a quick shower. The water seems to be on right now before getting ready for bed. He doesn't get nearly as much water as he'd like since the shower is timed. That's a safety precaution so prisoners don't accidentally drown in their cells. While washing himself, Guzman looks down at the shower floor and he's reminded of his last escape attempt in 2015 from Altiplano in Mexico. His associates dug a tunnel under the prison that connected to a hole in his shower floor. One night, Guzman slipped away through the hole, and by the time the guards were alerted, he'd already hopped on a motorcycle that had been left for him and he drove away. The water flow now stops completely. Guzman dries himself, puts on his clothes, and goes back to his book in bed. His back and head are in agony, like they have been for days. Unfortunately, medical attention doesn't come quickly in a Supermax for anything other than dire emergencies. In September 2021, Guzman submitted an affidavit to a U.S. court essentially saying that his physical and mental health were falling apart. Something about the total lack of sunlight, social contact, family contact, and no hope of escape before death. I have suffered a lot, Guzman writes, due to the treatment in AdMax. I now suffer from headaches, memory loss, muscle cramps, stress, and depression. I have suffered a lot. Suddenly the light switches off. Guzman lies down and gets ready to sleep. As the light being off means the power to the TV is off as well, he closes his eyes trying to drift off into a fitful sleep, but he knows it won't last. At some point the guards will come through, making their rounds, banging on his door, just to remind him that privacy doesn't exist here. It's just another part of the Supermax life, and another thing he complained about in a recent letter. And so ends another day at Supermax. There is some kind of method to the madness behind El Chapo and most prisoners at the Supermax's daily routine. No one has escaped since ADX Florence was founded in 1994, and Guzman has spent time in cell block H and range 13, which are reserved for the worst offenders. That being said, groups like Amnesty International agree that El Chapo deserves to remain in prison for life and kept away from innocent people, but they argue this kind of treatment in prison facilities crosses the line into inhumane. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, called Supermax prisons cruel, inhuman, and degrading. Many everyday citizens don't really care, as El Chapo is responsible for the murders of thousands of people at least, and what happens to him doesn't trouble most members of society. But many now say it's a myth that only the worst criminals are locked up in a Supermax facility. Eric G. King of Kansas City got sentenced to 10 years in prison at 29 years old for throwing 2 Molotov cocktails into a local congressional office. The Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II was not in his office at the time, neither was anyone else, as it was 2:52 a.m. Essentially, it was arson of an empty building and property damage. But since King got into fights in a couple of other prisons he was held in, eventually he ended up in Colorado's infamous Supermax. He described his experience in a Reddit AMA. After years, the silence or kind of silence becomes its own noise. You can become immobile, psychological issues start to pop up. No one's there for you. No one cares if you get hurt, sick, mentally unwell, if the food is horrible, or if you're sad or having a depressing week. You are on your own in every way for years. The silence and the isolation are two constants in every one of El Chapo's days at the Supermax, slowly eroding his sanity and whatever existed of his humanity in the first place over time. Even Robert Hood, an ex-warden of the prison, had only bad things to say about it. This is not built for humanity. I think that being there day by day is worse than death. Do you think El Chapo's treatment in Supermax is fair, or is it too extreme? Should prisons be this harsh, even for the world's most dangerous criminals? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.